Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Origin of the Dragon in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 31, Rescuing Anura. And the maid just happens to conveniently escape to bring a message straight to Arleman. Braska asked skeptically. Kalen was Anura's husband. Is it that absurd to think she may have challenged her father over his death? Cathiel responded. It's worth looking into, I suppose. Sedator responded, frowning. We just need to come up with some kind of plan. Get guard or servant uniforms, sneak around the back, go in through the servant's entrance. Jarath commented, making a sketch on the table with his fingertip. Get through the main hall without anyone being the wiser, and it's pretty much a straight shot into the bedroom areas. Could pull it off with just a couple folks. He caught Sedator's look, and raised an eyebrow. Problem. You used to work at the estate. Jarath shook his head. Broken once before. Me and a friend of mine, guy named Sorais. He wasn't much help. Bruhan snorted. Ah, so now we know the truth. You got caught and Duncan recruited you out of jail. Jarath turned his head to look at Bruhan. No, not out of jail. He turned back to Sedator. Guard uniforms would be better, man like how's going to be recruiting. Sedator gave Bruhan a look, causing the Dalish to bite back whatever smart remark he was planning to make. We can't risk the queen getting hurt. Give me Cathiel, Zevran. Jarath sketched the table with his finger a bit more. Might need a mage. Morrigan can move in armor if she has to. Sedator nodded. Do it. I'll stay here and coordinate our new support with Eamon. Lenore, you and Wynne go through what Bruhan and Leliana found on those mages, see if you can't find anything that traces them back to the blood mages. Sten, Okaran, stand by the gates of the place and look intimidating. If any of the others get into trouble, I want you positioned to get to them as fast as you can. Okaran, I see that bottle one more time. I'm getting a hammer and it's going in your other end. Okaran dropped the bottle and kicked it under the table, painting an expression of injured innocence on his face. Jarath, good luck. Keep the queen out of danger, if you can. Cathiel glanced at Jarath, who raised an eyebrow at her. Something amiss? Cathiel shook her head. Just surprised you asked for me on this trip. Jarath shrugged. We are going to the Arl's estate. Good chance How will be there. He nodded to her. Thought you might want to have a little chat with him. Cathiel smiled slowly. I do indeed. Her hand went to her arrows. Very much. She is lovely when she has that bloodthirsty gleam in her eye, no? Zevran said. He glanced up at Jarath. So, what's the story? You break in here, rob the place blind or something? Jarath shrugged. Or something. Zevran laughed. There is Erlina. Jarath helped Morrigan buckle into her armor. Zevran ended up having to do the same for Cathiel, as she had a bit of trouble with the heavy plate. She glared when he leered, and he merely winked in response. Erlina glanced at them. I can distract the guards, but you must move quickly. Why bother? There's only two of them, Cathiel said. She could take them both down with arrows easily. More guards patrol every hour. If they find these two missing, they will know. The elven maid shook her head. How you say? Something is amiss. Why so many patrols? Cathiel asked. After what happened to the last Arl, How is cautious. Cathiel sighed. Let's go. Erlina immediately went up the guards, wringing her hands in fright. Oh. You must come. I saw something. By the fountain. I think it was a dark spawn. Dark spawn. The guard gave her a skeptical look. She gestured hysterically. They will drag us all underground to be eaten. The guard shifted uneasily, and looked at his companion. Should we call for help? They cannot be buying this, Cathiel muttered. The other guard shook his head. Did you fall off a cart full of stupid? Call for help? So they can see us act like scared little girls because of some knife-eared wench. They will eat us all alive. Please. Get help. She looks ridiculous, Cathiel muttered. If there is something out there and we don't sound the alarm, we'll look worse than scared. Andraste's holy knickers. Fine, we'll check the courtyard, if it'll keep you from wetting yourself. But there's nothing there. Thank you. Oh. It was over here. Quickly. Cathiel ran a hand down her face. Are you kidding me? Here, I bought you a towel, a bar of soap and a razor while we were at the market. What is this for? Okaren asked. You wash with it, Wen said patiently. I know what soap is, woman. Okaren said. Personally, Brihan had his doubts, but he wished Wen the best of luck. What is this flimsy slip of metal? It's a razor. You shave with it. Shave. Any warrior worth his salt keeps his beard. That's what I keep telling Alistair. It's matted. It has stale food stuck in it. Oh, so that's where that bit of herring got to. Anyway, it keeps my face warm. It doesn't have to be pretty. Sides, the ladies love it. Tickles them in all the right places if I wag my chin like this. Ugh. Just take it. Take it. I could easily have lived my entire life without seeing that, Leliana whispered. Ma Soladin in an Abelis. He shook his head. Shall we go see how Wade is doing? Those are the worst guards ever, Cathiel muttered. Jarath sighed. Cathiel, I promise, next time we need to distract a guard, I'll let you do it, okay? She chuckled, and gave him a fond shake of her head. How did you distract the guard when you broke in? I cut his throat. Zevran laughed. That would do the trick, no. Erlina entered behind them. Ah. It took me forever to be rid of those two. She gave them a warning look. You must be careful now. The servants, they will not look too closely at anyone in uniform. All guards are alike to a cook, no? But you should not draw attention to yourself. Most of the guards are new. They will not know you for a stranger at a glance. It is best you keep your distance from all of them and try to blend in. Where's Anara? Cathiel asked. She is in a guest room off the main hall. This way, Jarath said. Andraste guide us, Erlina said, as she followed. This is my lady's room. We must hurry. Erlina went ahead. The Grey Wardens are here, my lady. A voice came from the other side of the door. Thank the Maker. I would greet you properly, but I'm afraid we've had. Anara sighed. A setback. Naturally. Why couldn't anything just go to plan? What kind of setback? Cathiel asked. Anara's voice was frustrated and angry. My host was not content with leaving me under heavy guard. He's sealed the door by magic. Cathiel gave Morrigan a quick look. The Swamp Witch examined the barrier, and then shook her head. Great, now what? Cathiel asked. We must get her out of there. Erlina wrung her hands. Don't panic, Erlina, Anara said, barely hiding the annoyance in her voice. Find the mage who cast the spell. He'll most likely be at Howe's side. Cathiel gritted her teeth at the command. Fine. We'll be back soon. Thank you, Warden. My prayers go with you. Tarn Howe. Erlina recoiled from the look Cathiel shot her. She swallowed. We'll probably be in his rooms. End of the hall, on the left, Jarath said. Erlina looked at him, then suddenly her eyes widened. It was you. Yes. Maker. Cathiel blinked. Jarath shook his head. Let's go. Cathiel's jaw dropped when the prisoner reached out, caught the guard by the throat, and snapped his neck. A moment later, the door swung open, and the prisoner began stripping the guard of his armor with quick, efficient movements. She could sense him. She glanced at Jarath, and he nodded. The prisoner was a warden. I thank you for creating such a distraction, stranger. I have been waiting weeks for this opportunity. He began putting the armor on. You never hear music in the sound of a key turning in a lock until you've been imprisoned. Who are you? Cathiel asked. I am Riordan. Senior Grey Warden of Jader. And you? He looked them over. Must be Duncan's recruits. Yes, you match the description. Jarath, yes. Yes. Riordan nodded. And you are Lenore? Cathiel Cousland. Ah. He inclined his head respectfully. I heard a rumor you had joined. I am pleased to learn it is true. Are these your papers? She asked. Yes. These are my records. The names of the dead I could recognize at Ostagar. What I could find of Duncan's own recruitment records. Copies of the joining ritual I rescued from our Denerim vault. Those should never be seen by any outside eyes, but I trust in their encryption. Cathiel blinked. What vault? The Grey Wardens have long maintained a vault in Denerim, with spare supplies for battle. It is protected by a coded lock. That would have been helpful, Cathiel said. When I went there recently, it had clearly been tampered with, I presume by Loghain, since you appear to have not known of its existence, but it remained impermeable. How did Arl Howe capture you? With an offer of hospitality in a poisoned chalice. I was fool enough to think Loghain didn't yet know who I was. The way out is clear enough, Jaroth said. The rest of the order is at Arleman's Manor. Report to Warden Commander Sedida. Riordan blinked at Jaroth, then nodded. Will do. Cathiel waited for him to leave, then glanced at Jaroth. Are you supposed to be ordering senior wardens? This is Ferelden. We are the senior wardens. I guess we are. Who goes? Oh, quit kidding around, you know me, Cathiel said. You think you're clever, do you? The guard sneered at her. She sighed. How was it this kind of thing worked for Braska? Anybody tries to come in here without Howe's say-so, we get to do what we liked with M. I think we finally got a bit of entertainment here, lads. He started forward, and his head exploded. Morrigan laughed. Oh, indeed. Most entertaining. Cathiel laughed as she began firing her arrows. 10 silvers says Cathiel can kill more than Morrigan, Zevran said to Jaroth. I'll take that. Well. I'm going to have to call that a tie, Jaroth said. No, Cathiel got the last one with an arrow to the eye. Zevran gave Cathiel a fancy bow. Beautifully shot by a beautiful woman. Thank you, Zevran, Cathiel said from where she was disarming the trap. He was already dying from Morrigan's spell. Nature is as deadly as she is lovely. True, but there is something about the taunt pull of a bowstring, and that glorious moment of release. But is it comparable to the tumult of harnessing the very elements, and that primal energy? You are forgetting the ecstasy of that moment of penetration, my friend. What is a single moment compared to the raw, savage caress of power that can be neither tamed nor denied? Maker's breath, what are you two talking about? Cathiel said, staring at them. Both faces were a mask of innocence. Which of you is the most efficient at combat? Of course, Zevran said. Morrigan grinned and stroked her hand down Jaroth's cheek. Another time. Of course. Where were we? You there. You. Yes, Okaran. Lenore said. I've been watching you. Where can I get some sauce for that rump roast? Braska looked out from behind her. Right here, you mad dwarven stallion. Go and make yourself ready, woman. I'll be right there to see to it. He stood, then fell face first onto the carpet. A moment later, there was a loud snore. Eamon blinked. What just happened? Okaran went crazy and fell down, Lenore said. She shrugged. It happens. Alistair walked over and grabbed Okaran's wrists, and Braska got his ankles. The two started carting Okaran away. It. Eamon blinked again. Happens. Oh, don't worry. I've got some tea that fixes things, he'll be ready to go as soon as we need him to swing a sword at anything. Eamon shook his head. See. Where do you keep your buckets? Lenore considered a moment. And do you happen to have ice? Never mind, I can make some. Oswine. Was this supposed to be a lesson? Did my father think it funny to leave me for so long before sending you? Jaroth handed Cathiel his cloak, and she draped it around the wounded man. Are you all right? All right? You taunt me with such a question. After what they've done, I doubt I'll ever be able to raise my arms again. He shook his head, near to tears. All right. What do such words even mean? He blinked at her, then looked again. Cathiel? Cathiel Kausland. Oh, Oswine. She put her arms around him as he clung to her. Morrigan, could you work some healing magic for him? She waited for the other woman to step forward, then stroked Oswine's hair soothingly. I'm here with the Grey Wardens, for the rightful King Alistair. You have my heartfelt gratitude. And you will have the gratitude of the entire Dragon's Peak Banorn. He shook his head, taking a deep breath as Morrigan's magic did its work. If my father sent no one after me, I can only assume that he does not yet know the true colors of the snakes he has allied with. Why was Arlhow torturing you? One soldier returning from Ostagar was my wet nurse's son. We have been friends since birth. Outrage filled his voice. He told me his unit was ordered to turn their backs on Kaelin at Ostagar. He swallowed. Before the Darkspawn overwhelmed him. He swallowed. The next day, he disappeared. When I went to search for him, I accepted a drink from a stranger and ended up here. Loghain will not get away with this. It is hard to imagine anyone with the power to take Loghain down. I swear, if there be any forum to speak out against Loghain, my father will be there. We'll take you to the stairs. Wait with Erlina, and we will get you out. Maker bless you. Androsta, bride of the Maker, have mercy on me. The man's bloodshot eyes focused on her. Alfstana. He squinted. Is that you, little sister? He frowned. No. He shook his head. I don't know you. He looked again. Do I? Are you real? Are you all right? She asked. Alfstana? I. He tilted his head. Don't know. Where is my sister? Have you seen her? He shook his head. I. He frowned as if trying to remember. I'm Irminric, Knight Lieutenant of the Denerim Chantry. You. He looked at her again. Aren't one of the Terran's men. I'm Cathiel Kausland. I failed in my duties. Maker, forgive me. I failed, and there's no telling what he's done. You're a Templar. She nodded to herself. Ban Alfstana's elder brother. Alfstana is. He swallowed. A far better Ban than I would have been. He rubbed his head. But I. He looked around. Don't remember how I came to be here. Lyrium withdrawal, Jarath said. The Maleficar. He had turned blood magic upon Templars and Circle Mages to escape from his tower. Near Redcliffe, I cornered him. He furrowed his brow in concentration. But the Terran's men took him from me, and brought me here. This Maleficar, was his name Jowan? Jarath asked. Cathiel sighed. Blood mage. Of course. Why had Lenore let that man go? Yes. He. Irminric nodded. Destroyed his phylactery. He gestured somewhat haphazardly. We were spread out, trying to find him. He frowned. I was alone. He blinked at them. I. He started to reach a hand out. You are real, aren't you? My dreams are. He closed his eyes for a moment. So strange now. Please, if you're not a dream, help me. What do you want me to do? Cathiel asked. Give this ring. He offered it to her. To my sister, Alfstana. Tell her. He frowned. Tell her I'm sorry. Please. Ask her. He sighed. To pray for me? Cathiel looked at Jarath. We'll have to get him after we find how. I don't think he can make it back on his own. He nodded. Let's keep moving. ACH. Leliana, get this stupid beast out of here. I am sorry, Okaren, was he disturbing you? No, but if he isn't careful I'm going to start thinking about how delicious he looks. A little taste of home, eh? I will make sure Schmooples is never underfoot again. Schmooples? You named a nug Schmooples? The last thing we need around here is a walking snack named Schmooples. He walked off, muttering. Schmooples? Brujhan asked. Well, what would you have named him? Leliana put her hands on her hips and glared. Arabellas, Ma Arlath. Schmooples is a perfectly lovely name, and suits him beautifully. Leliana scooped the nug up and walked away. Alistair snickered. Did you see your life flash before your eyes there? Emma Shemnan, Lethalin. He was wearing one of her father's cloak pins. The one her mother had made special, an emerald Idmaberry, worn for the first time when Fergus had married Oriana. Oren had pleaded to be allowed to wear it when they'd attended the feast at the fall tourney. He'd come to her in tears, having dropped it while playing with the servants' children, and she'd had to climb halfway down the bluffs to retrieve it. Mother Mallowl had caught them, but kept their secret. It took her a moment to even realize how was talking. Well, look here. Bryce Caslin's little Spitfire, all grown up and still playing the man. I never thought you'd be fool enough to turn up here. But then, I never thought you'd live, either. Why betray us, how? My father was your friend. Did it even matter? A clumsy appeal, child. He was a traitor to me and a coward to his nation. Trips to Orlais, gifts from old enemies, all while I sank in obscurity. Your family squandered glory that was rightfully mine. How suitable that their deaths should raise me to the ear of a king. After this, I'll kill your wife and children, too. She just might. Maybe she'd pay Zevran to do it. How sneered at her. Isn't that precious? Is this where I lament the monster I helped create? You're still so very new to this. Shall I show you how it's done? I made your mother kiss my feet as she died. It was the last thing your father saw. Your parents died on their knees, your brother's corpse rots in Ostagar, and his brat was burned on a scrap heap along with his Antivan whore of a wife. And what's left? A fool husk of a daughter likely to end her days under a rock in the deep roads. Even the wardens are gone. You're the last of nothing. This is pointless. You've lost. Her first arrow took him low in the gut. He staggered backwards. Father. Jarotha's dagger took the mage in the eye. Before the mage even started to fall, Morrigan's spell erupted in the midst of the guards, burning and scorching. Howe tried to draw his sword, and Cathiel sent an arrow into his knee before turning her attention back to the other guards. The cry of agony he let out warmed her heart. Mother! Another guard charged the elf, who sidestepped nimbly and stabbed him low in the back. The human man collapsed and Jaroth kept moving, taking out the guards that were rushing at Morrigan as Zevran began finishing off the ones that had survived the spell. Howe tried to go for his crossbow, and she put an arrow in his hand. He screamed again. Oriana! Cathiel aimed her bow at the other mage, then began picking off the ones trying to escape the elves. The battle was over in moments. Jaroth turned, and kicked Howe onto his back. Cathiel realized the man was alive, though he seemed to be having great difficulty trying to make his legs work. Jaroth met her eyes, then drew his blade. He leveled it at Howe's throat, and raised an eyebrow at Cathiel. You lie, Howe. To yourself most of all. I am a Grey Warden. He spat. There it is. Right there. That damned look in the eye that marked every Cousland success that held me back. It would appear you have made something of yourself after all. Your father would be proud. I, on the other hand, want you dead more than ever. Cathiel drew an arrow and silently nocked it. Howe tried to pull himself away, but Jaroth used his sword to make Howe watch her. She drew, aimed, and loosed the arrow into Howe's heart. Oren. Make her spit on you. He gasped. I deserved. His breath rattled. More. Cathiel stared down at Howe, watching him choke out his last breaths. Looking up, she caught Jarotha's eye. He was watching her, that same calm expression on his face. Better. She shook her head. It didn't change anything. Never does, really. Feels really good for a minute, but doesn't change the past. Just stops it from happening again. She blinked, then turned to face him. Is that? She sighed. Is it enough? That part is up to you. She nodded. It wasn't. It never would be. They were gone. She was never going to see them again. She looked at Howe, where he lay in his own blood, and bent to remove the pin. "You are right though." "Oh." Her smile was cold. It felt really good. That was a nice touch of drama at the end, truly. Zevran imitated drawing back a bow. "I liked the whole slowly taking aim bit. Next time, we should have music." Morrigan laughed, and even Jaroth smiled at that. Erlina was helping Anara dress in a guard uniform. Oswine was nearby, still wrapped in a cloak. He was shaking slightly. Irminik followed them like a lost puppy. Of Riordan, there was no sign. "My thanks," Anara said, looking up at them. "Why are you dressed like that?" Cathiel asked. Anara gave an impatient shake of her head. "Because there are two sorts of people in this house, those loyal to How, and those loyal to me. And those loyal to Alistair," Cathiel added silently. "The ones that just saved your ass. If How's people find me, I'll be killed. And my people will insist on escorting me back to the palace, where my father may also have me killed." They walked into the next room. Cathiel sighed. It was filled with guards. She recognized the woman who led them. Wardens. Catherine's voice was firm. "In the name of the regent, I am placing you under arrest for the murder of Rendon Howe and his men-at-arms." She pointed her blade at them. "Surrender, and you may be shown mercy." "We are here to free Anara, who was held captive," Cathiel said. She saw Jaroth start to shake his head, and sent him a questioning look. Catherine laughed. "Don't be ridiculous. The Queen isn't being held prisoner here or anywhere else. Her father would never stand for such a thing." She turned to Anara. "She's right here. Tell her, Anara." Jaroth winced. "What?" Catherine asked. "Sir Catherine. Praise the Maker you are here." Anara moved away from them. "This brigand tried to kidnap me. You double-crossing bitch." Cathiel began to reach for her bow. She saw Jaroth give the slightest shake of his head, and flick his eyes towards Oswine. "We will stand down," Jaroth said. Morrigan blinked, and whispered, "We have killed so many other guards. What do a few more matter? Get the Queen and the others to safety." He glanced at her. "Trust me." He jerked his head at Cathiel, and she walked forward with him. She saw Anara and the others begin to walk away. A count of 5, perhaps, just long enough for the Queen to get to safety, and then go for the bow. "I'm surprised this ended peacefully," Catherine said. "Bring the wardens. Loghain doesn't care about the rest." One of the guards took a step forward. Suddenly, his eyes narrowed, and he looked at Jaroth. "Don't I know you?" Jaroth's smile showed more than a hint of fang. The guard's eyes widened, and he brought his gauntleted fist into the side of Jaroth's head with considerable force. Cathiel blinked at the elf fell. So much for fighting their way out. "Corver!" Catherine called out. "Apologies, Sir Catherine." The guard shook his head. "That one's dangerous. This is the second time he's broken into this manner to kill an Arl." Cathiel raised an eyebrow. "Oh." Sedita stood up when she heard the sound of footsteps moving urgently towards them. Morrigan and Zevran flanked Erlina and a blonde woman as they entered the study. This would be Anara, then. "Eamon. We have a problem." Morrigan gave the woman a distasteful look. "We have more than one, I think." From the way the witch was holding her staff, it was clear she was considering doing Anara some harm. Zevran shook his head. "I suspect we are going to need a good plan, or a lot of knights, or perhaps both." "Calm down," Eamon said, raising his hands. "What has happened?" "The wardens have been captured." "What? How could this happen?" Eamon asked. From the looks Morrigan and Zevran sent Anara, Sedita had a fair idea. "Never mind that." Anara waved a dismissive hand. "The question is how to free them. I know where they are. I can locate Jaroth anywhere. Getting to him, however, is quite something else. They are in Fort Draken." Sedita frowned. "Eamon, what do you know about this fort?" "For starters, it's impenetrable." Eamon sighed. "We may have to continue without them." "Not an option," Sedita stated firmly. Perhaps we could. Cathiel jumped up as Jarath started to stir. Oh, you're awake. I was starting to worry. He touched the side of his head. I seem to spend way too much time in prisons lately. Join the Grey Wardens. See the sights from the floors of the best prisons in the land. It's not much of a recruitment slogan, is it? I've never seen a prison from this side before. She looked around and rolled her eyes. Very scenic. Where are we? He looked around. I'm not entirely sure. It's not the Royal Palace dungeon, I think. Too orderly. Fort Draken, perhaps. That doesn't really bode well for us. It is possible you do spend way too much time in prisons. Or get hit in the head too often. Shall we get out of here, then? I hope you have a plan. Maybe. He stood, then looked around again. He raised an eyebrow at her. Feeling seductive. She glared at him. Jarath, I'm naked in a dirty prison cell. I noticed. You make it look good. Call the guard over. Cathiel shook her head. Ass. She stood, and leaned against the bars of the cell. Hey, you. If you're not bleeding, I don't care. She batted her eyes. I was just lonely. He gave her a leering smile. Well, I could keep you company. He opened the cell. As he stepped through, Jarath caught him and smashed his face into the door. As the guard stumbled, dazed, Jarath shoved him into the cell, pulling the key ring off the guard's belt as he did so. Coming. Cathiel laughed. Right behind you. Why, you grimy little. Jarath closed the cell door, smashing the guard in the face again. Cathiel laughed. She gestured at them. Our situation has improved slightly. We are now merely naked in a dungeon. Jarath narrowed his eyes. I think the proper term for this would be torture chamber. That doesn't make me more optimistic. She started walking towards where the guard had been. Let's see if we can't find some. The inhabitant of another cell caught her eye. No. No, no. Could it? Rory. Jarath blinked in confusion as Cathiel grabbed the keys from him and ran across the room to another cell. He noticed a chest near the entrance of the room and opened it, out some gear before following Cathiel. Inside the other cell, Cathiel was trying to get a red-haired man on his feet. Jarath, help me, it's Rory. Jarath pulled a pair of trousers on and draped a cloak over Cathiel before rummaging through the guard's desk. He found a healing draft. The man was skin and bones, and seemed only vaguely aware of their presence. It took a few moments before something resembling coherence returned to the man's eyes. My lady? Am I dead then? No. No, you are in Fort Draken. We are going to get you out of here. She turned. Jarath, we've got to get him out of here. Get dressed. I'll find something. He picked up the guard's spare sword, and went into the next room. This should be fun. She thought she heard the sound of combat and dogs, and hurried with freeing Rory. He was battered and bruised. She could see scars all over him, and felt hot tears. Oh, Rory, if I'd. She felt tears trying to come, and willed them away. I thought you were dead. She was applying a second poultice when Jarath returned, carrying a large parcel wrapped in a cloak. Can he stand? Sir Gilmore struggled to his feet as Cathiel handed him the last of the poultices. I think so. Good. Jarath set the cloak on the ground, revealing what appeared to be 3 sets of guard armor and weapons. Where did you find those? 2 of them on a rack. The dented one on the guy guarding the rack. With Cathiel's aid, Sir Gilmore was able to get into the armor and strap the sword to his back. I'm not sure fighting our way out is going to work. Sir Gilmore is barely able to walk. Then I suggest we simply walk through like we've a perfect right to be here. With any luck, they'll just assume we are fellow guards. You think that will work? If it doesn't, get him on the ground and then shoot everything but me that is still standing. Great plan. She glared at him. Wouldn't I need a bow for that? You aren't naked anymore. You should be more optimistic. Stay behind me. Right. Any idea where you are heading? Jarath looked around briefly. That way. She shook her head. This won't be easy. If it were easy, someone else would do it. A lone guard stood in the armory. He looked up at them hopefully. Hey, are you relieving me? It's about time. Why not? Yes. Jarath said. He gave an apologetic shrug. Sorry I'm late. Good. Mind the blighted chain mail. The commander will skin us both if he finds any rust. I'll get on it. He saw the disbelieving look on Cathiel's face as the guard simply walked away. Found you a bow. He tossed her the weapon. As soon as Alistair takes the throne, I'm advising him to fire everyone who works here. Probably a good idea. He retrieved himself a better sword, and handed one to Ser Gilmore. This doesn't appear to be the exit. Shall we try the next room? Cathiel just about swallowed her tongue when the next room was full of armed men. What's this? Ah. You must be the new recruits we were expecting. You're late. The rest of your patrol is in the storage room. Find them, and get yourselves ready for inspection. Jarath saluted, then walked back out of the room, heading in the direction the man had indicated. Cathiel hissed at him. What are you doing? He smiled at her. She'd never wanted to punch him so much as she did right now. Getting the rest of our patrol. You don't want to fail inspection, do you? This is your plan. He rolled his eyes at her. You aren't naked, and you have a bow. So everything is going swimmingly. You could try walking out of here naked, it would make a great distraction. I think I hate you. She shook her head at him. Stop having fun. Now you sound like Setida. Did you need something? The guard that had been polishing a boot looked up at him. I was told we should get ready for inspection. You're in our patrol. I never saw you before. I'm new. Cathiel was grateful she was wearing a helmet. It hid the disbelieving look that crossed her face at Jarath's rather blatant lies. Braska had been a terrible influence on their young friend. We've only been here 2 weeks ourselves. And we're already in hot water. So the assistant quartermaster. The man shrugged and rolled his head from side to side. Is a little miffed with us at present. I told you we should have put those potatoes in the cellar straight away. Some things went amiss. Mistakes were made. The quartermaster got chewed out by Tern Loghain, and then he chewed out the assistant. And now, to get back at us for landing him in trouble, the assistant quartermaster won't give us our blades. And you can't pass inspection without a regulation sword. Maker. When Alistair fired these people, he needed to do it out of a trebuchet, into the sea. Or perhaps a volcano. Jarath shrugged. Let me handle him. He's down the hall. In the armory. Maker help us. It couldn't be that easy, could it? She glanced at Rory, and saw his eyes were wide. They followed Jarath and the others back to the armory. Andraste's sacred girdle. He's gone. Well, don't just stand there. Get your blade and let's report to the colonel before he gets back. Jarath casually handed both Ser Gilmore and Cathiel regulation blades and shields before grabbing a shield for himself. The colonel glared down at them. It took all Cathiel's willpower not to just start giggling at the absurdity of it all. So, you think you're ready to go on your first patrol mission, do you? Yes, sir. Jarath actually managed a proper salute. The man smiled at him proudly. That's what I like to hear. You there? Yes, sir. The guardsman said. Stand up straight. You're a soldier in the king's army, and the king's own men don't slouch. And you? Yes, sir. Stop fidgeting. You can fidget on your own time. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Kiss arse, the first guard muttered to the second. The colonel looked at Rory. You there, Red? Yes, sir. Rory's voice was a bit hoarse. What's the one thing a soldier can't do without? Discipline, sir. Humph. You're not as dumb as you look. See to it you all act like soldiers of Ferelden out there. I expect the lot of you back here by sunup. Now get out of here. And make her watch over you. Password. Ah. The guard squinted. Rabbit, I think. Going on your first patrol, are you? Good luck. As they walked out, Jaroth held up a hand. Wait here, need to grab something. Don't take too long, the guardsman said. Just following orders. Jaroth shrugged. Right. Jaroth slipped quickly into a side room. He came out a moment later, carrying a parcel. Cathiel didn't quite manage to hide her grin as she recognized her bow sticking out. Quartermaster asked me to drop these off during our patrol. All right, let's get a move on, Cathiel said. Preferably before anyone noticed just how short Jaroth was and decided to question that. Or question anything. It occurred to her that if they actually had planned any of this, it never would have worked. They'd have to come up with a story. Nobody would ever believe the truth. Cetadel looked up as Jaroth and Cathiel entered, followed by two rather confused-looking human guards and a third man who looked exhausted. Cathiel looked at Cetad's startled face and chuckled. Reporting for duty, Commander. She broke out in giggles. Expressions of confusion began to turn to slowly dawning horror on the guards. One reached for his sword, and Jaroth rather casually laid his sword against the guard's throat. Cathiel continued as if nothing happened. You said keep the queen safe, so we decided to go along quietly and just break out later. No chance of her getting caught in the middle that way. Jaroth disarmed the guards. As prisons go, it was actually fairly nice. We didn't even have to kill anyone on the way out. Cetada sighed and shook her head. Who are your new friends? Prisoners. Jaroth shrugged and handed the swords over to Eamon. Hostages? Emergency rations? I suppose that is up to you. The guards swallowed and edged away from Jaroth. You gentlemen can return to your, Anura sighed. Duties. Yes, your majesty, the taller guard said, his tone relieved. The other guard gave a squeak before fleeing. The third man, one who looked vaguely familiar, remained. Cetada frowned. They had absolutely no clue who you were until you came in here, did they? Cathiel was laughing so hard she had to hang on to Alistair to keep from falling over. Before we came along, those two didn't even have swords. Cetada just shook her head. And this is... Cathiel's face turned joyous. This is Ser Gilmore. From home. Wonderful news. She recognized him now, the young man who had almost been one of them. Cathiel turned back to Ser Gilmore, who was starting to appear unsteady on his feet. When? She placed a steadying hand on Ser Gilmore's arm. Come with me, young man. We'll get you fixed up in no time. Cetada sighed and turned her attention back to Eamon. Does Anura being here affect our plans for the land's meet? Anura shook her head. I fear that my escape will make matters worse. Now that he cannot use me to support his claim on Merrick's throne, he may resort to drastic measures to stay in power. I doubt he will say anything publicly. She looked them over. At least until he has a better idea what to expect. How much time do we have to stop him? Cetada asked. She already knew the answer, but she wanted a better idea of the angles Anura was going to play. Very little. We will need to work together, and quickly. My father has gone mad. I didn't believe it at first, but he is gripped by a paranoia so severe it prevents him from seeing sense. He saw me as a threat, yet even now I am certain he will be telling the nobles you are dangerous murderers that have kidnapped and mind-controlled me. He may even believe it. So we rescued you. Cathiel folded her arms and glared at the woman. To what end? You will need ammunition come the land's meet, and I can help in that regard. You have only just arrived in the city, so perhaps you are unaware of some. She sighed. Recent events. Denerim has been in turmoil since Ostagar. Many people here are angry or grieving. Strangely, the unrest is worst in the alienage. Few elves accompanied the army. They should have little reason to be upset. Which means that Hao and my father must have given them reason. I don't know what is happening there, but I am certain my father has his hands in it. A useful lead, Anura, but... Eamon narrowed his eyes. You could have sent this information with your maid. That is true. I feared for my safety as Hao's prisoner, but to tell the truth I sent Erlina to you because I hoped we might join forces. You need evidence for the Landsmeet, but you also need a stronger candidate for the throne. You need me. It sounds more like you need us. Setida was content to let Cathiel do the talking. It freed her to watch Anara's face, and the anger in Cathiel's voice had Anara talking a bit more freely in an attempt to soothe the young woman's ruffled feathers. I have no doubt Alistair is biddable enough, and decent, but even with his blood he is no king. You think only I can see it? Not only that, Alistair is a Grey Warden. It will look like you are trying to put a Grey Warden on the throne, despite your claims. I am a neutral party, and I am already queen. Eamon shook his head. Anara, you are indeed Kaelin's widow, but I am the daughter of Ferelden's greatest general. Who do you think truly ruled this nation for the last 5 years? Kaelin? I am what this country needs, not an untrained king who does not even want the throne. I can help you stop my father. Consider what I have said. For now, I think I will retire to my room. Commander, when you have a moment, I ask that you speak to me in private. She walked out of the room. Eamon sighed. Well, she's quite. He shook his head. Spirited. I remember when Logain first brought her to Denerim. Poor Kaelin was a good boy, but Anara was always 2 steps ahead. Had him jumping when she snapped since the first time she batted her eyelashes. I cannot help thinking she may be trouble. But we should keep her close, all the same. Why do you think she's trouble? Other than the obvious reasons, of course, Setida thought to herself. But then, Eamon had his own hand in this particular game, even if he was a piece she controlled. This is an alliance of convenience for the moment, we are united against Logain. Be careful how much trust you place in her. I do not for a moment think Anara means to give up her power easily. Still, I would rather have her where we can watch her than actively working for Logain. But aren't we planning to dispose her? Cathiel asked. Anara was a capable administrator for Kaelin's lands, but she has not a drop of royal blood. We did not fight the Orlshians all those years just to lose our royal line in a single generation. Not when there's a surviving son of the blood. Setida considered a moment. Alistair was still entirely too reluctant to take the throne. He was a warrior, and at times she could see the prince in him. He'd last 10 minutes in Orzammar, but for Ferelden, he could be the stuff of legend. She knew her preferred solution. Perhaps it was time to give things a little push. Maybe Alistair should marry Anara. Are you serious? Alistair's jaw nearly unhinged. No. Never mind. I don't even want to hear the rest of this. Why you two just keep talking about me? I'm going to stand over here, with my fingers in my ears. Eamon actually looked like he was considering the idea. That would certainly solve a lot of problems, and put forth the strongest argument before the Landsmeet to remove Logain from power. With Theron blood on the throne, and Anara's wisdom and popularity, Ferelden could present the most unified front against the Blight. Unfortunately, the marriage would never happen unless they both agreed to it. And they wouldn't, if she had her way. But then, that wasn't the point. And I suspect that might take a lot of persuading to get past her pride and his humility. Cathiel stared at Setida. She waited until Eamon had left the room before the words burst out of her. I cannot believe you just suggested that. Political marriages occur all the time. Setida shrugged. It's not like it would have to affect the two of you. This isn't Orzammar. Cathiel hissed. I'm not going to be Alistair's concubine. No, I rather think you'd be better suited as his queen, but since the two of you seem content to merely carry on, I thought I'd examine other options. Setida said. Cathiel stared, dumbstruck, as Setida continued. Your parents did well by you, you are a capable administrator, a skilled warrior in your own right, and if I am beginning to understand Ferelden nobility, your blood is considerably closer to royal than Anara's. However, and the Kaus lands are spoken of with respect, and after the deprivations of Arlhow I can easily see Denerim rallying behind the last of the Kaus lands, returned to bring How to answer for his crimes. Alistair interrupted, his voice low. She makes a persuasive argument there. Cathiel turned to face him. Are you asking? Marry me. Yes. Cathiel kissed him. Yes. She blinked as actual fireworks appeared in the air around them. With a sigh, she turned to look at Lenore. The mage was grinning quite unapologetically. She laughed, then kissed Alistair again. Sedita just shook her head. All right, I'll deal with Anura. Jarath. I'm going to the alienage. I need you to. I'm going to the alienage. Jarath stood up. Behind him, Morrigan rose quickly to follow. Sedita sighed, then nodded. Very well. Take Sten and Zevran with you. I'm taking Alistair and Cathiel. They should see the alienage. Sedita nodded. Fine. Jarath was already striding out of the room. Cathiel and Alistair scrambled quickly to follow. Chapter 32, The Alienage. Okay, how do we get into the alienage if the gate is sealed? Alistair asked. You follow me, Jarath replied. He ducked down through an alley. He caught hold of a window ledge and pulled himself up to walk along the top of a fence, then jumped onto a roof. You remember the part where we aren't light-footed elves that only weigh 10 pounds, right? Alistair asked. Next to him, Morrigan simply shifted into a raven and flew up to land on the roof next to Jarath. Wait there, Jarath said, and vanished. A minute later, the cellar door near them opened. This way. How many secret passages are there like this in Denerim? Alistair asked. Is that an official question, Your Majesty? Jarath asked. Yes. Then none. They emerged near a dock. Jarath led them immediately to a door, and opened it without bothering to so much as knock. A handsome elf nearly dropped the cup he was holding as the four of them entered. Cousin? Welcome home. Come in, come in. We assumed you were with the other wardens at Ostagar. Things have been. He swallowed. Difficult since you've been gone. What happened here? There was a note of anger in Jarath's voice. The other elf shook his head. Arlhow led a purge. Vengeance for Vaughn's death, they say. Jarath nodded. How many died? All emotion was gone from his voice and face. Cathiel felt a chill run down her spine. I don't know. After the purge came some sort of pestilence. It's hard to say who was killed by soldiers and who fell to disease. Isn't anything being done? Cathiel asked, her voice appalled. Her father never would have left Hyaver's alienage to such deprivations. She felt sick when she realized that the elves of Hyaver had been under How's mercy for almost a year. Some men came from the Tevinter Imperium. They say they have magic that protects healthy people, and they've got a quarantine for the sick. They. The other elf sighed. They took Valandrian and your father, both. I'm sorry. Where's Valora? She went to the hospice a week ago. They said. He frowned. They said she had the plague. I didn't believe it, I mean, she was fine. But they took her to quarantine. I haven't seen her since. Nijera. She went home to Hyaver. Her family spent all of her bride price on her travel back. The other elf shook his head. At least, I hope she made it. Where is this quarantine? A house on the north side of the square. You can't miss it, cousin, there's a huge crowd there now. I have to go. All right. It's good to see you again, cousin. Jarath. Cathiel asked. Pardon. Jarath turned back around. Sarais, these are my fellow wardens, Cathiel Kausland, Terna of Hyaver, and Alistair Thurin, King of Ferelden. And this is Morrigan, a witch of the wilds. Everyone, my cousin Sarais. He shrugged. And if that completes introductions, we've got work to do. Maker's breath, cousin. Sarais shook his head. Try to leave a little of Denerim standing when you are done. They followed Jarath towards the alienage tree. A young woman was arguing with a group of other elves. Jarath headed towards her. Shiani? Is that really you? Maker's breath. They said all the Grey Wardens died with the king. Everyone thought. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Valandrian even held a funeral for you. Cousin, you have no idea. She shook her head. The things that happened after your wedding. She let her hands fall to her sides. I'm babbling, aren't I? I'm so happy to see you. Wedding? Cathiel asked. You're married? Alistair asked. Morrigan raised an eyebrow. Now this sounds like a curious tale. I was betrothed. It didn't end well. Jarath shrugged. And the story unfolds. How did this wedding come to naught? He gave them an annoyed look. Imagine a storybook wedding, this was the opposite. Alistair gave him a dubious look. All right. He nodded. That does sound bad. I got conscripted by the wardens. We can talk about this some other time. So much has happened. It's good you're home. Shiani beamed at him. I saw Nijera in Redcliffe. She looked well. Her family spent all of the dowry your father paid getting her set up there. I saw sore eyes. A lot of people blame him. She gestured angrily. Can you believe that? They blame Sore Eyes as if he were responsible for what the new Arl did to us. What are you talking about? You don't know? Oh, of course you don't. After you left, the regent appointed a new Arl, Rendenhau. The first thing this human did was march troops in here for a purge. Some people, the stupid ones, mostly, blame you and Sore Eyes for standing up to Vaughn. Another elf called out to them. It's a fact that Howe sent the soldiers here because of Vaughn's death, Shiani. Even you know that. Shiani rounded on him. It's a fact? Really? So we should take everything the humans say at face value? We're all lazy, vulgar, thieves then. That's what they say, isn't it? Jarath shrugged. Howe is dead. Denerim goes through Arls pretty quick lately. All these gifts, and it's not even my naming day. Shiani looked positively gleeful at the news. A woman shook her fist at Jarath. You just don't care how much trouble you bring down on us, do you? Must be nice to be above your own people. Shiani shook her fist right back. Who brought Vaughn here in the first place? Tell me what we did to deserve that, and maybe I'll start caring what you think. Idiot. Elves wind up dead in the market gutters every day over a wrong word, or a look, or nothing at all. That's how it's always been. We fight back, or we submit, but it doesn't change anything. I'm not about to shed a tear over that butcher Howe's death. If I could, I'd kick his grave marker and dance on his ashes. Cathiel smiled. She could get to like this woman. Jarath smiled at her. Don't hold back, tell me how you really feel. Shiani just shook her head at him. We'd be here all day. And I'd still have more to tell you, cousin. What is going on here? These people say they're here to help us. Funny thing, the people they help all disappear. The woman yelled at her. That's not true, and you know it, Shiani. Both my sisters got protections from the plague, and they're fine. What about your niece, though? Shiani pointed a finger at her angrily. And my uncle Syrian, and Valandrian? Where are they? Wait, what's this about my father? Jarath's voice became ice. Shiani turned back to face him, running a hand through her hair in frustration. The Tevinters quarantined your father yesterday. I told him not to go to the hospice. Not one elf they've taken in there has come out again. Who knows what's become of them? I'm going in there. I knew you'd do something, cousin. Make her watch over you. Shiani's face held relief, and more than a small trace of hero worship. Cathiel caught up with him as he started for the building. Shouldn't we take a moment? I'm going in there. Morrigan put a hand on her staff. 'Tis time for the rampant slaughter then. Jarath jerked his head. There is a way in around back. Morrigan looked disappointed. So, no rampant slaughter. We go in, we come around from behind, where there is less chance of flammable innocent bystanders, and then we begin the rampant slaughter. Wonderful. For a moment there, you had me concerned. Alistair and Cathiel exchanged a look. And then Alistair narrowed his eyes and nodded. He put a hand to his sword. Let's kick these bastards out of Ferelden. It occurred to Cathiel that if they did actually want to get the Tevinters out of Ferelden at this point, they were going to need a broom. Or maybe a mop and bucket. A couple tried to demand they surrender. One almost managed to complete the sentence. They stepped out into an alley. What's this? Another shipment already? We weren't. The guard narrowed his eyes. Wait, you're no Tevinter. Who are you supposed to be? I'm Warden Jarath Tabri. Cathiel blinked as the guard nearly wet himself. Oh no. I've heard of you. He turned to his fellows, his face terrified. Attack. Cathiel sighed as she dropped the last one with an arrow. If he had heard of you, you'd think he'd have realized attacking was about the stupidest thing he could have done. Jarath walked to the door and kicked it open. What is the meaning of this? We were told that there would be no interference from the authorities. Do I look like one of the authorities? Jarath asked. No. You look like an elf with more curiosity than sense. You will regret this, you know. Believe it or not, we have been given dispensation to do our business here. She smirked. The humans talk a great deal about how very wrong slavery is, but isn't it funny how quickly the smell of gold overcomes such ideals? Slavers. Jarath narrowed his eyes. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to acquire new blood? These slaves will fetch an excellent price in the Imperium, and we are paying handsomely for this opportunity. She shrugged. But enough. I am here to halt your slaughter, nothing more. Jarath showed a hint of teeth. Try. His blade burst into flames as Morrigan's staff glowed, and then he fell on the slavers. Cathiel picked off a couple archers, and Alistair dealt with a Qunari mercenary. Cathiel blinked. Jarath disemboweled the elf woman, then he simply sheathed his blade, and left her there, gasping and twitching on the floor. Morrigan gave the woman a satisfied smile, and followed Jarath. Alistair started to lift his blade for a mercy kill. Leave her, Jarath said. Jarath. He turned, and she nearly recoiled from the look in his eyes. Leave her. Alistair slowly sheathed his sword, and they followed him down the corridor. A man in ornate robes looked up when they entered the room. The walls were lined with cages, packed so full of elves they could hardly move. I see we are to have an interruption after all. I am Caladrius. And you, I assume, must be the Grey Warden I've heard so much about. I don't care who you are going to die. Jarath continued moving forward. The rage in him now was entirely his own. Are you certain you wish to commit such a rash action, Grey Warden? Look around you. Surely we can reach some kind of... He waved a hand. Compromise. That's not going to happen. Caladrius sighed. Pity. It looks as if we shall have to settle this the hard way, then. My apologies. He started to intone a spell. Jarath sent out energy of his own, and the spell dissipated in the mage's hand. The man gave him a surprised look. So, for that matter, did Alistair. The rest of the guards moved to attack. His blades moved almost of their own accord, and the men that came his way simply died. Enough. Enough. It seems your reputation is an accurate one. I surrender. Surrender. The man had to be joking. I don't think so. Wait. Caladrius backed away as Jarath continued to move towards him. Hear me out, kind sir. Were I to. He held out his hands. Use the life force of the remaining slaves here, I could. He smiled. Augment your physical health a great deal. Allow me to leave this place alive and I would be more than happy to do this little service for you. An interesting offer, if a tad messy. Morrigan observed. Blood magic. So. Caladrius actually looked hopeful when Morrigan spoke. Is my offer of interest to you? Yes. It interested him. Just not the way the mage was hoping. Cathiel barely realized Jarath had moved before his blade impaled Caladrius's abdomen. The dagger was in low, not an immediately fatal wound, but it served to keep the mage pinned to the wall. She didn't hear what Jarath said, but the mage almost immediately tried to flee, slicing himself still further on the dagger. Jarath stepped away, and gave Morrigan an almost imperceptible nod of his head. The swamp witch began to gesture. Cathiel buried her face in Alistair's chest as he too turned away. The screams lasted thankfully only a few moments. She raised her head, and saw Jarath walking back to where the cages were. He opened one, and the elves began to come out. An older elf, his face lined with the worry of years, approached Jarath. "Son, is it really you? When they said all the Grey Wardens died at Ostager, I prayed they were wrong. Are you all right? What are you doing here? I couldn't let them hurt my family." She saw Jarath's face soften. It was hard to reconcile the boy being hugged by his father with the man she'd just seen slaughter his way through a slaver operation. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You're so much like your mother. Where's Valandrian? They took him on the ships yesterday. He's probably halfway to Tevinter by now." "But why? He's an old man. He's educated and well-spoken. They probably want him for a house servant." Syrian raised his head and looked around. "This isn't a good place to talk. Come to the house. There's something I should give you." He left the house with the rest of the elves. Cathiel watched as the older man left. "Your father." She looked again at the smoking remains of what had recently been a human being. "The woman out there? Shiani. My father and her father were brothers." Cathiel bit her lip. "Jarath, how did you become a Grey Warden?" "I told you. Duncan conscripted me." Next to her, Alistair spoke up. "Jarath." "Yes. This doesn't happen again. Not on Ferelden soil. Ever." Jarath nodded. "That's why." "Why?" Alistair blinked at him. "Why you need to be king." He turned his attention to Morrigan. "Do you have a few moments? I'd like to introduce you to my father." Cathiel had seen Morrigan fight Darkspawn. And demons. And dragons. She was pretty sure that was the first time she'd ever seen Morrigan look afraid. His father fussed. He let him. "Let me get a look at you. Maker, don't they feed you wardens? You're all skin and bones." Jarath smiled at him. "Did Sorais mess anything up while you were gone?" "Ha! You hear that, Sorais?" Syrian smiled and laughed. "No, everything's fine. If it looks a little messy, it's because I had to pull up the floorboards to get this out for you. It belonged to your mother. I think you should have it now." Jarath looked down at the blade. He turned it over in his hands, and then nodded to himself. "Circles. Thank you. I know you'll do great things. You already do. So, tell me, who is your friend?" "Another warden." Jarath smiled. "Father, this is Morrigan. She's a witch of the wilds." "A who of the what?" "An apostate, from the Korcari wilds." "I." Syrian's eyes widened. "I think I might need to sit down for this." They left to go find Alistair and Cathiel. "You." Morrigan's voice was confused. "You took me to meet your father." He laughed. "Morrigan, there is an archdemon on the loose, and we could easily all be dead or worse tomorrow. For now, I choose to live each day as though it were my last. So yes, I took you to meet my father. You said that you are worth my distraction. If I die tomorrow, I die a happy man, because right now, I have you." He kissed her, there under the Vihanadal. He didn't care who saw them. "You are an impossible man. You are just now figuring that out." He led her to Alarith's store, where Sorais had taken Cathiel to get more arrows. Well, look who's here." Alarith gave Jarath a pleased nod. "Welcome home. When we heard what happened at Ostagar, we assumed the worst. Should have known better." He wagged a finger at Jarath. "Would it kill you to let us know you're alive once in a while? What's happened since I left?" "They tore the place apart, cut down anyone who so much as looked at them." Alarith sighed. "There were bodies stacked in the square for weeks." Jarath shook his head. "Howe is dead, along with most of his soldiers." "Son, didn't you learn the first time? I'm not saying you shouldn't have done that, but, well, you shouldn't have done that. It will only bring more trouble here. Things are bad enough." "It won't," Alistair said firmly. "Oh, and I suppose you can do something about it?" Alarith asked him. "Who are you supposed to be?" I am Alistair Thurin. He took a breath. King of Ferelden. Alarith blinked, then looked from Alistair to Jarath. His face paled, then he slowly turned back to Alistair. A pleasure to meet you, Your Majesty. We should be getting back, Jarath said. Cathiel nodded. We still need to kick Loghain off the throne. The Templar listened to their report, then shook his head. One odd thing I am willing to believe, but two is no coincidence. Let's head to the orphanage. Jarath led them to the orphanage. Cathiel swallowed when she saw it. That was no kind of place for children to grow up. She started to reach for her lockpicks, but Jarath got the door open by simply putting his shoulder to it. When they stepped inside, she fought the urge to retch. From the look on Alistair's face, he was fighting the same. Wrapped bodies rotted against the walls. Some of them were very small. The Serato nodded. The feeling is intense here. This is the right place. I know not if it's the work of the Maleficarum, but there is definitely evil here. You go first, I will follow. Evil. Alistair nodded slowly. This is. He glanced around. Who could do this? The Denerim City Guard. Jarath twitched a shoulder. No. Alistair shook his head. They wouldn't. Alistair. Jarath turned towards him. This wasn't the first time the alienage was purged. He headed deeper into the orphanage. Alistair clenched his fists, and followed. Do you hear me, Ser Willem, Ser Willem? I'm a falling, Ser Willem, Ser Willem, today. I'm a maiden, Ser Willem, Ser Willem. But I'm dying, Ser Willem, Ser Willem, in pain. Cathiel shuddered at the eerie young voice reciting the twisted nursery rhyme. Now and then she caught movement out of the corners of her eye. Children, playing. Children, running for their lives. 1, 2, Merrick's run through. 3, 4, the kingdom's at war. 8, 9, and now you die. The ghostly laughter echoed off the walls as more rage and despair demons seemed to crawl from the very walls. Andraste, I don't want to go yet. Please. It's so cold now, so cold. A child's voice screamed. In another room, she heard an adult voice, begging someone to take her and leave the children alone. There was sobbing. This is the center of it. Cathiel jumped at the sound of Serato's voice. Before they could respond, a voice echoed from the walls. Leave, mortal, you do not belong here. Blessed be the Maker and his prophet Andraste, Serato said aloud the same prayer she'd been intoning silently. Your pathetic maker is nothing compared to my glory. I command you, show yourself, demon. Hide in the shadows no more. Serato's voice rang out, and they moved in, making a semicircle around the blind Templar. You dare to command me? Let us see if your precious maker can protect you now, worm. The demon flowed up from the blood-stained floor. Others came from the walls. Cathiel fired an arrow as Alistair set his shield between her and the demons. On the opposite side of the Templar, Jarath's blades whirled as Morrigan used her magic. Whatever faith guided Serato's hand was strong. The Templar brought his mace down on one of the demons in a devastating blow. The demon vanished again. Cathiel whirled. Serato's blind eyes looked around the chamber. It is not done. Another chamber. No one had made it this far. The bodies weren't even stacked, let alone covered. You think you are safe? The voice seemed to echo from all around them. Serato's voice responded. Though the Golden City has fallen, I have seen your face and your light, I am your. Save your pedantic chant for your sermons, Templar. You have killed my brood. The Maker compels you, show yourself. Something flew from the floor, and Morrigan narrowly managed to dodge it. Alistair got his shield up in time to prevent the remains of a chair from striking Serato. The voice rumbled. The Maker? There is no Maker. There is no Golden City. But there are demons, yes. I hear not your blasphemy. By Andraste and all the divine after her, I order you to face me. You delusional fool. More demons, and the battle was joined again. Cathiel hissed as a claw raked a shallow wound in her leg. Alistair's blade cut through the demon a moment later. He started to move towards another demon, and his foot caught one of the corpses. He stumbled, and would have been in serious trouble had Morrigan's spell not caught the demon coming towards him. For a moment, the room was still. I have seen the work of demon before. Some Maleficarum consort with them. Serato shook his head. But the maker must have guided. A claw was sticking out of his chest. He looked down at it, and then the demon threw him to the side. And now you die. The demon lunged at her. Jarotha's sword sliced through its torso, earning a shriek of pain and rage. The demon tried to turn on the elf, but Jarotha was fast. His next swing caught the demon across the throat. It fell, and slowly began to melt away. Alistair went to Serato's side. We won. The Templar coughed. It was good to fight one last time. He smiled up at Alistair. We make our own path in life. He patted Alistair's hand. Make yours matter, my ch. Cathiel felt a tear roll down her face as the old Templar died. You said? Alistair hesitated. He took a deep breath. You said the alienage had been purged before. Jarotha stopped, and turned towards him. Yes. My brother. Alistair shook his head. And your father? He twitched a shoulder. He looked down at his hands, then back at Alistair. It was Merrick's guards that raped and murdered my mother. Alistair went pale. He closed his eyes, and then shook his head. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Jarotha met his eyes. Be better. He turned, and continued walking out of the alienage. Cathiel blinked when Jarotha led them down an alley and up to a door. Jarotha. One more demon to fight. He glanced back at them. Unless you're too tired. Alistair made a growling sound. I could do with something to hit. Same. Jarotha kicked the door down. Grey Warden, isn't it? Strange you would force such a visit in a time of blight. A man in the grey robes of a scholar looked them over. I suppose I am used to inspiring a different kind of seeker. Your stories attract them. And then they disappear. Jarotha twitched a shoulder. The man chuckled. The adequate ones find the beacons, and then I find them. But you. He smiled. You are already brighter than the signal at Ishal. Eyes are on you from a very high vantage, Grey Warden. I cannot hide in your wake, but I will not be a footnote. His form shifted into that of a demon. Witness Gaxgang. I was expecting something a little more. Alistair shook his head. Satisfying. Jarotha raised an eyebrow. Yes. I'm sure Setida will have found us someone else to stab by now. He gestured in the direction of Eamon's estate. Morrigan and Cathiel exchanged a look and an eye roll. They turned over the papers they'd found to Eamon. Eamon looked troubled by the news. I think we have enough evidence to turn the entire land's meat against Loghain. Good, Setida said. I think everyone who is going to arrive in time has. I will call the land's meet for tomorrow. Make any final preparations necessary. Setida nodded to Eamon, then turned to the others. Get cleaned up, then meet me in the study. Setida finished going over what the land's meet entailed, then sighed. Jarotha, according to what I've been told, it seems that the land's meet can be decided by a duel. For the obvious reason that most of us aren't Fereldan citizens, that means if it comes to that, you will have to represent us. Loghain isn't going to stand 50 feet away and let Cathiel pepper him with arrows, and, well, no offense Alistair. None taken. Alistair assured her. We should have our best warrior as champion. That would be you even without the citizenship issue. I remain your sword, Setida. She nodded. Because I know certain of you, this is an order. Burhan and Leliana have arranged everyone's clothing. You will give them your full cooperation in this matter. She sighed, then gave Alistair a considering look. I wish we had a crown for you. Braska bent, and rummaged in his bag. He pulled out a crown. This one work. Where did you get that? Setida asked. Nicked it from Loghain. You. Setida stared at Braska. Stole Loghain's crown. Junior helped. He pointed at Jarotha. I. Setida sighed. Never mind. I don't want to know. Put that thing away before someone arrests you. I don't know, I think it might just send the proper message, Lenore said, giggling. Chapter 33, Landsmeet. Cathiel adjusted the armor on Alistair, making sure the griffin was aligned front and center. He smiled down at her, bending slightly to kiss her forehead as she tightened the last strap. How do I look? Like a warden. She kissed him. And like a king. He does good work. Good. He gave her an admiring look. I like the drake scale armor on you. Remind me to thank Leliana and Brujin for having it made. He bent to kiss her again when there was a polite knock on the open door. Jarath. Hi. We were just. My apologies for interrupting your royalnesses, but I found something that might complete your look. He handed Alistair a wrapped parcel. Oh, present. And it's not even my name day. Alistair grinned boyishly as he began to unwrap the item. This. His hands started to shake as he stared at the item in disbelief. Tthys shield. It's Duncan's, isn't it? That's his crest. Jarath twitched a shoulder. I thought maybe you might want it. Alistair could barely get the words out. Thank you. Truly, I had no idea his shield wasn't with him. This is perfect. He strapped the shield to his arm. I don't know how else to express my gratitude. He grabbed Jarath, pulling the startled elf into a bear hug. This means a great deal to me. I can't believe you remembered it at all. Just take it. Cathiel had to hide a smile at the annoyance in Jarath's voice. And let go of me. Oh. Of course. Alistair set him back on the ground. Thank you again. Jarath gave him a nod and left the room. Cathiel hesitated a moment, then followed. Thank you. He already said that. Now I'm saying it. I know. She sighed. I know we haven't always been friendly to each other, or even nice, but... She smiled. You've had our backs at every step. You even helped me get how. I owe you. We owe you. Jarath stood there a moment, still and quiet. Cathiel waited, expecting a response, but after a couple heartbeats he finished walking away. She gazed after him a moment before returning to Alistair. Citadel looked up as Alistair and Cathiel entered the room. She gave a low whistle. You two look. Braska chimed in, like a couple of royal badasses. Lenore and Zevran smacked him lightly on the back of the head simultaneously. Cathiel grinned at Cetida. You look like a royal badass yourself, princess. Leliana grinned, pride evident on her face as she made last-minute adjustments to various people. Overthrowing a regent calls for a certain amount of style. Eamon entered a moment later, followed by Jarath and Morrigan. Good. You are all here. Bring Alistair and join me at the palace as soon as you are ready, Commander. Cetida nodded. Sten, Okaran, and Zevran are going to be accompanying you, Eamon. Loghain has hired assassins before, and it seems he has only grown more desperate since. Eamon nodded, and took his leave, followed by the others. Cetida looked around the room. Everyone ready? Leliana smiled triumphantly. Dressed in our best and prepared to go to war. Cetida grinned. Good. Let's go. Eamon stood on the balcony, Alistair and Cathiel flanking him. The blue cloaks, trimmed in silver with embroidery of griffins, served to mark them as wardens. Cetida stood in the lower area, with the rest of the wardens, in a similar cloak. On her brow was a silver circlet, more subtle than a crown, but marked with the sign of House Egican. No few of the lords stared when they saw it. My lords and ladies of the Landsmeet, Tairn Loghain would have us give up our freedoms, our traditions, out of fear. Eamon's voice rang out, strong and powerful. He placed us on this path, yet we should place our destiny in his hands. Must we sacrifice everything good about our nation to save it? The angry muttering of the Bannorn was cut off by the sound of Loghain's mocking applause. A fine performance, Eamon, but no one here is taken in by it. Loghain shook his head. You would attempt to put a puppet on the throne and every soul here knows it. The better question is, who will pull the strings? He turned to look at Cetida. Ah. And here we have the puppeteer. She stepped forward. He gave her an accusing look as he continued. Tell us, Warden, how will the Orlesians take our nation from us? Will they deign to send their troops, or simply issue their commands through this would-be prince? He glared. Where is the famous steadfastness of the dwarves? How much did it cost the Empress to buy your loyalty? The blight is the threat here, she said. Her voice was almost maternal, patiently addressing a child throwing a tantrum. Not Orlais. Alfstana's voice was wry. There are enough refugees in my Banorn now to make that abundantly clear. Wolf rose. Cathiel had done her work well. The south is fallen, Loghain. Will you let Darkspawn take the whole country for fear of Orlais? Loghain's voice was apologetic. The blight is indeed real, Wolf. But do we need Grey Wardens to fight it? He gestured at her again. They claim that they alone can end the blight, yet they failed spectacularly against the Darkspawn at Ostagar, and they asked to bring with them 4 legions of Chevaliers. He shook his head. And once we open our borders to the Chevaliers, can we really expect them to simply return from whence they came? He glared down at her. Time to change the field, and hit him at his weakest point. After all, why had the Orlesian occupation been so hated? You allowed Rendenhau to imprison and torture innocents. The blow was solid. The Banorn was rising. Sire gestured angrily. The warden speaks truly. My son was taken under cover of night. The things done to him. He slammed his fists down on the rail. Some of them are beyond any healer's skill. Loghain shook his head, and tried to regroup. Hau was responsible for himself. He will answer to the Maker for any wrongs committed in this life. As must we all. He glared at her. But you know that. You were the one who murdered him. It was a mistake on his part, reminding the Banorn who, exactly, had stopped Hau. Cathiel shifted, drawing attention to herself right on cue. The last of the Causlands. Loghain tried to draw them back. Whatever Hau may have done, he should have been brought before the Seines Chell. There is no justice in butchering a man in his home. No. Sedida's voice rang out, the voice of the royal house of Orzammar. Then why did you send a blood mage to poison our leman? Loghain gave her a scornful look. I assure you, Warden, if I were going to send someone, it would be my own soldiers. I would not trust to the discretion of an apostate. Indeed. The ire in Alfstana's voice couldn't have been more perfect than if Sedida had Leliana coach her. The woman arched an eyebrow, her arms folded across her chest. My brother tells a very different tale. He says you snatched a blood mage from the Chantry's justice. Coincidence? Cathiel really hadn't been joking when she said Alfstana would be a powerful ally. The Grand Cleric stood up, and the eyes of every noble in the Banorn turned to her. She turned her stern eyes on Loghain. Do not think the Chantry will overlook this, Tairn Loghain. Interference in a Templar's sacred duties is an offense against the Maker. He tried to wave her off. Another mistake. Whatever I have done, I will answer for later. At the moment, however, I wish to know what this warden has done with my daughter. Beautiful. It was like watching him walk through the Deep Roads gate on his own. What have I done? She shook her head and smiled. I've protected her from you. He glared at her. You took my daughter our queen by force, killing her guards in the process. What arts have you employed to keep her? Does she even still live? The only art that kept Anera was a lie. A suggestion of support. Anera stepped out from where she'd been, protected by the watchful eyes of Sten and Jarath. I believe I can speak for myself. She walked into the center of the room, playing the role of queen beautifully. It was almost a shame. Lords and ladies of Ferelden, hear me. My father is no longer the man you know. This man is not the hero of Riverdane. She pointed to the balcony as she addressed the crowd. This man turned his troops aside and refused to protect your king as he fought bravely against the Darkspawn. She spread her hands. This man seized Kaelin's throne before his body was cold and locked me away so I could not reveal his treachery. She turned, reaching a hand out to Sedida. I would have already been killed, if not for the Grey Wardens. Sedida stepped to her side. Loghain is not to be trusted. He looked down at his daughter. Had he been any other man, she might have felt sorrow at the expression on his face. He'd lost. He knew it. So the warden's influence has poisoned even your mind, Anira. He shook his head. I wanted to protect you from this. He turned back to the Banorn. My lords and ladies, our land has been threatened before. It's been invaded, and lost, and won times beyond counting. He tried to rally them back. We Ferelden's have proven that we will never truly be conquered so long as we are united. We must not let ourselves be divided now. Stand with me, and we shall defeat even the Blight itself. Bryland was the first to stand, as Cathiel had said. Southreach stands with the Grey Wardens. A noble whose name she didn't know stood. The warden helped me personally in a family matter. She noted a bit of surprise on Eamon's face and made a mental note to ask about that later. Broska was grinning. Alfstana's voice was firm. Waking Sea stands with the Grey Wardens. Syard's voice was still filled with rage. Dragon's Peak supports the Wardens. Wolf sat as he spoke. The Western Hills throw their lot in with the Wardens. Maker help us. A quavering voice spoke up. I stand by Loghain. We've no hope of victory otherwise. The remaining voices failed to join him. I stand with the Wardens. From the other side of the room. The Blight is coming, we need the Grey Wardens. She counted as the last of the voices died away. 6 more than Cathiel had predicted. Her companions had done their work well. The land's meat is against you, Loghain. Step down gracefully. She really hoped he wouldn't. Traitors. Which of you stood against the Orlshian Emperor when his troops flattened your fields and raped your wives? He turned and gestured at Eamon. You fought with us once, Eamon. You cared about this land once. Before you got too old and fat and content to even see what you risk. He shook his head. None of you deserve a say in what happens here. None of you have spilled blood for this land the way I have. His voice was almost a snarl. How dare you judge me? His soldiers entered. She was rather amused at how casually Jarath and Sten stepped aside to let the soldiers pass. Perfect. Call off your men and we'll settle this honorably. Let the Banorn see the Wardens as the peacemakers. The diplomats. Alistair's reign would begin with honor. Loghain narrowed his eyes. Then let us end this. Loghain stood on one side of the room, flanked by his soldiers. When we first met at Ostagar, I would never have thought so. But Ostagar seems like it happened in another lifetime, to someone else. A man is made by the quality of his enemies. Merrick told me that once. I wonder if it's more a compliment to you or me. Enough. Let the land's meet declare the terms of the duel. Alfstana's voice rose above the crowd. It was good that woman was an ally. It shall be fought according to tradition, a test of arms in single combat until one party yields. And we who are assembled will abide by the outcome. Will you face me yourself? Loghain stared at her. Or have you a champion? Jarath stands as the Warden's champion. She saw the Banorn react. A lovely side effect. She knew she was sending the Warden's best. But the Banorn saw an elf, young enough not to have his full growth. They saw an insult. A few shifted uncertainly. It wasn't enough to beat Loghain. Killing him wasn't enough. She wanted him destroyed. Alistair and Cathiel were standing by Eamon. She went to join them. Alistair nodded to her. It was almost over. Cathiel tried to appear confident as the nobles made a circle around Loghain and Jarath. Loghain stood more than a foot taller than Jarath, and outweighed him by at least 50 pounds before taking into account the differences in their armor. Jarath had chosen splint mail, and for all it was made of dragon skin it looked like not more than paper next to Loghain's full plate. The elf was fast, true, but it mattered for nothing if all Loghain had to do was land a single blow. The combatants circled each other for a moment. Loghain drew his blade, tapping it lightly against his shield. Jarath made no move towards his own weapons. With a shout, Loghain charged. A half-heartbeat before Loghain reached him, Jarath spun to the side, drawing his weapon with one hand as the other shoved against Loghain's sword arm, knocking the bigger man off balance. Before Loghain could recover, Jarath came around his back and slashed Starfang into the gap between Loghain's arm and shield, cutting and damaging the straps. As the two faced off again, Loghain's shield hung askew. Though it still provided some modicum of protection, its movements were slowed. At least, not without knocking himself dangerously off balance and providing his much faster opponent with all the opportunity he would need. Again, Jarath went still, waiting. Loghain glanced at his shield, shifting his arm to try to mitigate the damage done. He moved in, this time cautiously. Jarath let Loghain take a few steps, then swiftly moved in to meet him. Loghain lifted his shield to block, and Jarath shifted his own motion, coming around to the side of the shield. The damaged strap prevented Loghain from being able to shift the shield's position in time to prevent Jarath's blow to the side of the knee. Cathiel smiled. The combination of shield damage and the blow to the leg slowed the bigger man considerably. The more lightly armored Jarath would be able to dance in and out practically at his leisure. From the frustrated look on Loghain's face, he'd obviously come to the same conclusion. Again, the big man charged, but as Jarath started to move, Loghain shifted his weapon of choice from sword to shield in a movement clearly intended to simply pummel his smaller opponent to the ground. It would have worked too, except as Loghain struck, Jarath dodged inside the shield, instead of away from it, moving in close enough that the larger man could bring neither shield nor sword to bear. Jarath plunged his dagger into Loghain's side, drawing a hiss of pain from the human. He then pushed off, using Loghain himself to provide leverage as he batted Loghain's sword out of his way, again putting distance between the two. Blood dripped from the opening in Loghain's armor. Loghain shifted his shield, obviously expecting the elf to close in again and finish it. Jarath's face never changed expression. He began to circle Loghain, who turned to keep the elf in front of him. Each step took nothing from Jarath, but it was clear that the injuries had taken their toll on Loghain. Cathiel whispered to Alistair. "What is he waiting for?" "I don't know." He blinked. Neither does Setida. Loghain began to move towards the elf, slowly at first, before shifting to a charge from a closer position. Jarath caught Loghain's blade on his dagger, redirecting the force rather than blocking it and letting Loghain's own momentum carry him out of position. Starfang whipped out in a blow, tearing a gash in Loghain's breastplate. Jarath completed a spin, bringing Starfang in again, this time completing what his first blow had started and demolishing Loghain's shield entirely. The dagger came up and penetrated the shoulder of Loghain's sword arm. Loghain fell, landing on one knee. He tried to lift his sword, but the blade nearly slipped from his fingers entirely. "I underestimated you, Warden. I thought you were like Kaelin, a child wanting to play at war. I was wrong. There's a strength in you I've not seen anywhere since Merrick died. I yield. I accept your surrender." Setida's mouth dropped open. That was not supposed to happen. Alistair shook his hands and gestured. "I didn't just hear you say that. You're going to let him live? After everything he's done? Kill him, already." Riordan stepped out of the crowd. "Wait. There is another option. The Terran is a warrior and general of renown. Let him be of use. Let him go through the joining. You want to make him a warden?" Setida stared at him. "Why? There are 8 of us in all of Ferelden. And there are." Riordan hesitated. "Compelling reasons to have as many wardens on hand as possible to deal with the archdemon." Anura was quick to grasp the straw. "The joining itself is often fatal, is it not? If he survives, you gain a general. If not, you have your revenge. Doesn't that satisfy you?" "Absolutely not," Alistair said. "Riordan, this man abandoned our brothers and then blamed us for the deed. He hunted us down like animals. He tortured you. How can we simply forget that?" Braska glanced at Jarath. "Maybe Riordan has a point, we could put him through the joining. Joining the wardens is an honor, not a punishment. Name him a warden and you cheapen us all. I will not stand next to him as a brother. I won't." Alistair drew back his shoulders. "Not all of us have spotless honor, you know," Jarath said quietly. Alistair shook his head. "Some things can't be undone or forgiven. This goes way past having spotless honor, we aren't talking about a minor hiccup in his past. I didn't want to be king. I still don't. But he drew himself up to his full height. If that's what it takes to see Loghain get justice, then I'll do it. I'll take the crown. Jarath twitched a shoulder. Then I hereby invoke the Grey Warden's right of conscription. I remove this prisoner into my custody. Anger shone on every inch of Alistair's face. You. Setida stared at Jarath before putting a hand on Alistair's arm. It is his right, Alistair. Alistair glared down at her. Fine. You want Loghain in the Grey Wardens so badly. Then I'll be leaving the Wardens to take the throne. You can't just stop being a Warden, Alistair. Watch me. Cathiel spoke up before the argument could continue. This can be discussed later. We are keeping the land's meat waiting. Right. Eamon strode towards them, and turned his gaze on Setida. Warden Commander, as the arbiter of this dispute, what is your decision? Who will lead Ferelden? Setida stood, again every inch the princess. Alistair will be king, and Tir Nakaus land will rule beside him. Anara's face went black with fury. Eamon's voice held a small note of satisfaction as he turned to her. Anara, the land's meat has decided against you. You must now swear fealty to the king, and relinquish all claim to the throne for yourself and your heirs. Anara all but spat at him. If you think I will swear that oath, Eamon, you know nothing of me. Jarath gave Loghain the barest nudge with his foot. Loghain glanced at the elf, who gave a pointed look towards the guards, and Setida saw realization dawn in his eyes. Loghain turned to his daughter. Anara, be reasonable. Anara turned towards him, and her eyes widened slightly. Very well, Eamon. I will make the oath. Jarath helped Loghain to his feet and the two started to follow Riordan. Morrigan followed a few paces behind. Setida turned to the others. Go back to Arleeman's estate, finish gathering whatever supplies we need for the trek back to Red Cliff. She sent a furious glance in the direction Jarath had gone. Alistair. She shook her head and clenched her fists. I'm sorry. It wasn't your fault. He nodded, and sighed. Setida gave a jerky nod of her head before stalking off after Jarath. Cathiel hesitated a moment, then followed. Somebody's about to have his ears clipped. Braska shook his head. What? Lenore stared. What was he thinking, pulling that stunt? Brehon frowned. I have this revolutionary idea. He raised an eyebrow. We could. He waved a hand. You know. He shrugged. Ask him. Braska snorted. Yeah, because the guy has always been so forthcoming with answers thus far. Wynne shook her head. Enough, now is not the time. Riordan and Jarath had helped Loghain remove his damaged armor before Setida caught up with them. Morrigan began casting the healing spell as Setida stalked into the room. Riordan stood by a small altar, mixing something into a silver chalice. Setida shoved a finger into his chest. Jarath, what the hell was that? Commander, if you wait just a few more minutes, we can find out if this conversation is even going to be necessary. It's going to be necessary regardless, she said, shoving him back a step. Riordan tried to intercede. Commander. She held up a hand. I'm talking to Jarath. I do not desire input from anyone else in this room. Then let us speak elsewhere. He gestured for Setida to follow him. They had barely managed to get out of the room before Setida grabbed his arm. I repeat, what the hell was that? The rite of conscription. You may not be familiar with it, as I believe you joined voluntarily. Cathiel stepped next to Setida. This is not the time for your games, Jarath. It isn't a game, Cathiel. It never has been. Grey Wardens do what they must. He shook his head. You'd have preferred to execute Anara. Execute? Cathiel blinked. Why would I execute Anara? Jarath raised his eyebrow. Because your alternative would have been to have her raise a rebellion against you. For her to whisper to all the nobles that if she were on the throne, their people would have their farms back by now, that the supply routes would be open, that the refugees would have homes. And they'd listen, because they'd want to believe it and to believe that if she were back on the throne they would have some modicum more power of their own. He gave Setida a steady look. Am I right? Cathiel stared when she saw Setida sigh and nod. But she did take the oath. Of course she did. He turned to look at her. Just as you became a warden. Because she too, loves a father who saw the axe coming for his child. And she, like you, will do her duty. I've given you a hostage to gain you an administrator who knows the ins and outs of Ferelden, and because her father raised her to know her duty, will serve you well. I suggest you acknowledge Anera as Terna of Gweren as soon as possible. Cathiel's jaw dropped open, and she tried several times to speak. Setida shook her head. An admirable thought, but we still can't trust Loghain. Jarath shrugged. How many of our allies did we start out able to trust? For that matter, how many of our allies can we trust now? If he moves against us, I will kill him then. Yes. She tapped his breastplate. You will. If he survives the joining, he is your responsibility. I suppose he is. He twitched a shoulder. Was there anything else? Just this. She gazed up at him. Pull another stunt like that, and I'm going to make you eat my shield, got it? Understood, Commander. Morrigan looked up from where she had finished closing the last of Loghain's wounds. Loghain followed her gaze. Everything settled. Jarath nodded. Riordan, are you ready? Yes. He handed Loghain the chalice. You are called upon to submit yourself to the taint for the greater good. From this moment forth, you are a Grey Warden. I. Loghain nodded. Understand. Loghain was rather surprised when he woke up. The elf sat in a chair across the room, watching quietly. I passed your test. Fate has a twisted sense of humor, it seems. I suppose you think I'm some sort of monster. More so since I survived your ritual, you keep striking at me, and I just refuse to die decently. I don't think you're a monster. Loghain sighed. You're a poor liar, you know. It's kind of you to say so, all the same. We must settle things between us somehow or other, or none of us will get any work done. So, what will it be? The elf twitched a shoulder. Setida wishes you to know that if you act against us in any way, you'll be executed immediately. She's made you my responsibility. We're going to have to work together. Loghain remembered the fury on the dwarf's face when she'd confronted the elf. Is that punishment meant for me or for you? And just like that, we're allies? I can't imagine it's so simple. I don't know what concession you want from me, Warden. I expect my word will not satisfy you. You are a Grey Warden now, too, you know. Indeed, I'd almost forgotten that. Thank you for the reminder. I think it's time we got to the point here. What do you want from me? I can't imagine you spared my life in the Land's Meat by accident. You have some plan in mind. You tell me, what do you want? What I want? What an odd question. Loghain shook his head, and stared at the other man. It was several moments before he answered. I want to ride back to Denerim and sit in the war room and find no empty chairs at the table. I want to lose nothing else. I want a line, clearly drawn, that I can defend. I want an end to this war. All of this can rightly be called my fault. Whether or not you can do better remains to be seen. He met the younger man's eyes. But if you can make this the end, Warden, I will follow you. I swear it. Jarath rose, and picked up the items on the table. He handed them to Loghain. The sword is called the Keening Blade. It's been enchanted to be especially potent against the Darkspawn. The shield. The shield I think you might know. He stared at it in disbelief, then took it reverently. His fingers traced the heraldry. Merrick's shield. Where did you? It seems he lost it in the deep roads some time previous. An enterprising merchant found it, and it made its way into my hands. Jarath shrugged. And it seems I rendered your previous shield somewhat beyond repair. That you did. He looked up. The elf in front of him couldn't be more than 17. He doubted the young man even had his full growth on him. Where did you learn to fight like that? From a night elf. Loghain started at the young man's answer. You've been unconscious for about 3 hours now. The soldiers are preparing to march. We can talk more later. Chapter 34, Return to Ostagar. Which one? Jarath looked up at Loghain. Which one what? Which night elf taught you to fight? Adaya. Jarath twitched a shoulder. My mother. Adaya was your mother? Yes. He nodded. I see it now. Now that he knew, the resemblance was clear. A wonder he had missed it before. In your eyes. Loghain smiled in memory. She was quite the firebrand. Yes. I imagine she's quite proud to see what you've become. She's been gone a long time now. I'm sorry to hear that. He remembered the young woman, her long knives moving faster than the eye could see. They'd stood back to back at the Silver Creek, her knives protecting him while he fired arrows. It seemed another life. Are you? Something in the way the young man had asked the question made it a dangerous one. Of course. You realize, were she still alive, she would have been living in the alienage? There were a few other veterans there, as well. He shook his head. There is no saving the alienage. Damage from the riots has yet to be repaired. There are bodies still rotting in their homes. It is not a place I would send my worst enemy. There is no chance of holding it if the blight comes to Denerim. Despite what you may think, Warden, I have done my duty. Whatever my regrets may be for the elves, I have done what was needed for the good of Ferelden. Of course. You did your duty, as expected. Jarath finished polishing his axe, and went to work on his sword. Did you need anything else? No, I suppose not. His life was, quite literally, in this young man's hands. And he still wasn't sure why Jarath had been willing to stand against his friends on Loghain's behalf. He'd have expected the elf to hold the most anger for him, and yet, the boy had even been kind. He looked at this shield strapped to his arm. Lost in Ortentag, over 2 decades ago. Handed to him by Adaya's son. He tilted the shield. Adaya had named her son Jarath. He remembered a rainy evening, huddled beneath branches. She'd asked him about his own father. Gareth. Could. He frowned. Jarath looked down at his sword, frowning at the metal. It will take a few days for the armies to gather at Red Cliff. He glanced over at the parcel beside him. Senator ran into one of Kaelin's guards, who says there may be information of use back in the King's camp at Ostagar. I see. In the morning, you and I are heading out to retrieve it. So the dwarf was not forgiving after all. Would it not be cleaner to simply execute us? She seems to think us all remaining together is going to end in bloodshed. Jarath twitched a shoulder. After we are done there, we are going to make a quick trip into the deep roads for Shale. She's coming with us. We will meet back in Denerim, then be at Red Cliff by the time the Dalish and the dwarves have arrived. You are being unrealistically optimistic about our chances of success. Jarath sheathed his blade, and stood. Shale and Morrigan will be coming with us. I stand by my previous remark. Loghain shook his head. There is nothing left in Ostagar that could possibly be worth the risk. This is a fool's errand. That would be why we are going. Jarath shrugged. Do you trust me, Loghain? Loghain frowned. That is an odd question for you to ask. Certainly you do not trust me. You swore you would follow me. I am willing to trust that oath. I am asking if you trust me. Loghain stared at the smaller man. Yes. He was surprised to hear the word pass his lips. Jarath nodded. This trip is necessary, though not for the reasons Sedida thinks. You know something she does not. Jarath turned his eyes to the south. I know it is necessary for you to return to Ostagar, and for me to be there when you do. Sedida watched the small party leave. She shook her head. Sten fell into step beside her as they walked back to Eamon's Manor. She stopped, and looked up at him. Was he right? She gestured towards the gate Jarath had led his party through. I don't have a clear view from my angle. I believe that he is an apt pupil, and that you have taught him well. I just wish I understood why he did it. He believed it to be his role. I believe he acted because he knew you could not. I have yet to observe him stray from his purpose, either as warden, or as your second in command. He isn't my second. Is he not the one you send, when you cannot go yourself? She sighed, then nodded. I never really thought of it. I just know I can count on him to do what needs be done. As he did at the land's meet. You agree with what he did? The Qunari do not waste. Killing Loghain would have been a waste. I suppose there is wisdom in that. I just don't like it. She looked to where Burhan and Leliana were talking with a revered mother. There is some wisdom in the chant, you know. Then someone should release it into the wild. It is in danger of dying out. That got a smile. Good one, were you saving that up? No, that came to me just now. He looked pleased to have gotten her to smile. Then he turned his gaze to where the chantry stood. Tell me, where is the wisdom in crying for a derelict god to save you? She leaned back on the gate, and looked up at him. True, we have to save ourselves. He leaned on the wall next to her. My people have a tale. A great Ashkari during his travels came upon a village in the desert. There, he found the houses crumbling. The earth so dry and dead that the people tied themselves to each other for fear a strong wind would carry the ground out from under their feet. Nothing grew there except the bitter memory of gardens. The Ashkari stopped the first man he saw, and asked, what happened here? Drought came. And the world changed from prosperity to ruin, the man told him. So what happened? Change it back. The Ashkari replied. The villager became angry then, believing the Ashkari mocked him, for no one could simply change the world on a whim. To which the Ashkari answered, then change yourself. You make your own world. I suppose you have a point. Believe in whatever you like, absent creators, or whimsical gods. Follow prophets, or Ashkari, or omens in the earth and sky. You will find wisdom only if you seek it. Morrigan frowned. Their spells are more potent than they should be. This has the feel of something directed, not merely random happenstance. This is how they entered Ishal the first time. Digging a pit like this, it took time. Jarath walked along the rim of the pit. Loghain shook his head. How could they have known the battle plan would rely on Ishal? That did not become part of the plan until that very day. I had initially planned to use mages, back when I thought the plan had a chance of success. Jarath crouched, looking down into the pit. Interesting that they would know Ishal would be the signal. He frowned. But not that the signal would go unanswered. Loghain sighed. We could not flank something that had no flank. Had there been any chance of reaching Kalian at Ostagar? He shook his head. I would have. I believe that you believe that, for what it's worth. He turned the sword he'd picked up over in his hands. Interesting. What is interesting about that blade? Morrigan asked. It's not the blade, exactly. He held it out as if testing the balance as they started out of the tower. They strung Kaelin up like a trophy. And this is Duncan's blade. He died beside Kaelin. Why string up the king, but not the commander of the Grey? The commander of the Grey, at least, they could reasonably recognize. That is. She stopped, and then frowned thoughtfully. That is an interesting notion. Perhaps they had another use for Duncan's body. I thought Darkspawn were mindless. Loghain kicked a genlock into a pit. They are, near enough. At least they are supposed to be. He put the blades in his pack, and started moving. He stopped at Kaelin's body. It does not seem right, to let them have their trophy. He turned to Loghain. Help me cut him down. You intend to burn him. We don't have time for that. I heard wolves, earlier. That will serve to keep him from the Darkspawn as well as any pyre. They came across a mage protecting a group of refugees on their way back to Red Cliff. Braska blinked, then took a second look at the mage. You. He stared at Lenore. It's you, again. He glanced at the others. Please don't do anything to me. I've only been trying to help. One of the refugees moved to stand in front of Jowan. Don't be scaring good Master Levin. He's saved us 3 times over. Lenore smiled. Stay your current course, Levin. Redemption suits you. He returned the smile. Thank you, Warden. I will. I swear to you. He glanced at the others. Everyone, let's move. The warden has more important matters to attend to. Are you joining us, Zevran? Lenore raised an eyebrow. No. No, I do not think so. Surely there is something else on your mind other than that. Zevran couldn't quite meet her eyes. She sighed. You seem different now. He shook his head. I thought that this might be it. He looked up at her. Are you certain you wish to talk about this? I really do not know what to say. Lenore sat down across from him. Zevran, I think you know me well enough to know I don't let questions go. Yes. I want to know what's changed. A low sigh escaped him. Very well. He nodded as Broska joined them. An assassin. He looked down at his hands. Must learn to forget about sentiment. It is dangerous. You take your pleasures where you can, when life is good. To expect anything more would be reckless. I thought it was the same between us. Something to enjoy, a pleasant diversion and little more. And yet. He swallowed. I know what you mean. Broska nodded. I grew up amongst those who sold the illusion of love, and then I was trained to make my heart cold in favor of the kill. Everything I have been taught says what I feel is wrong. He shook his head. Yet I cannot help it. Since you asked me into your bed, I have been nothing but confused. Do you understand me at all? We do. Lenore nodded. And we feel the same way. Broska touched his hand. Then that is enough for me. He smiled, then looked up at Lenore. He took a deep breath. Still have the earring. I would like to give it to you. He held it out. As a token of affection. Will you take it? She took it from him, and smiled. That sounds like a proposal. A hint of a blush actually crept across his cheeks. Not unless you wish it. Lenore smiled as she put the earring on, and then hugged them both to her. Loghain took the cup Jaroth handed him. The swamp witch was engrossed in reading a tome, while the golem took up watch some distance from the camp. I'm not sure what good these papers will do. Celine's plot died with Kaelin. Assuming that was the full intent of her plot. Loghain nodded. Orlshion's plotted the way most people breathed. A fair point. Jaroth sipped from his own mug. He glanced over to where Morrigan had busied herself with the grimoire, then asked Loghain, was Ostagar what Flemeth meant when she warned Merrick about you? Loghain's eyes widened. How could you? She told Merrick that if he kept you close, you would betray him, each time worse than the last. And how do you know this? She told me. Before I killed her. You. He stared at the elf. Killed Flemeth. Even having fought him, having seen him cut his way past ogres, he had trouble believing that. Yes. He twitched a shoulder. Though I doubt it took. I threatened her once. A tree grabbed me. No trees. She did turn into a very large dragon though. Loghain frowned. You'd think something like that would sound unbelievable. He gazed into the fire. She told Merrick that sometimes, vengeance changes the world. He shook his head. She knew things she couldn't possibly have. She knew I'd come to kill her. I believe she expected me. He gave a twitch of his shoulder. She told me there were many, many reasons to kill her, more than I could possibly know. She also said that this blight's threat was greater than we realized. It was she who saved us from the Tower of Ishal. Why did you kill her then? Morrigan is her daughter. I see. No, I don't quite believe you do, but no matter. Flemeth didn't seem to take it personally, in any event. Jaroth drained his tea. But then, I believe that's because the entire thing played out to her expectations. She was expecting us when we first came to the wilds. She gave us the treaties. She even seemed to know that Jory would not survive the joining. Jory. A knight, from Redcliffe. He. Jaroth twitched a shoulder. Declined to participate in the ritual. Duncan killed him. I see. She asked me what I believed. What did you tell her? That believed or not, some things must be accepted. He frowned. It appeared to be the answer she was looking for. She played herself off as a madwoman, but I believe she may have been saner than any of us. She asked Merrick to give her a promise and to never speak of it. Did she ask the same of you? Yes. Did you agree? Yes. Is that why we are here, then? Maybe. Loghain smiled ruefully. She warned Merrick the blight was coming. And that he would not live to see it. That would explain why he let the wardens back into Ferelden. Jarath refilled his cup. It seems we are all dancing to Flemeth's tune. A discouraging notion, to say the least. Loghain frowned. Do you trust Morrigan then? Jarath laughed. I trust Morrigan about half as far as I can throw her. Indeed. Were he fool enough to trust me, I would not enjoy his company so much. Morrigan said, not bothering to look up from her tome. Loghain shook his head. I suppose you disapprove of my being here as well. Morrigan laughed. No, indeed. You are a vast improvement over Alistair. That, however, is not saying a great deal. They sat in silence for a moment, looking over the ruins. Loghain cast his senses about, experimenting a bit with his newfound abilities. He could sense the difference between the wardens and the Darkspawn. The Dalish elf was able to not only manage that, but to tell one warden from another, even somehow managing to track them by the sense of their passing. Would it have been so bad? Jarath asked quietly, pulling Loghain out of his reverie. Would what have been so bad? Kaelin wedding Selene. Yes. Do you hate Orlais so much? Hate doesn't describe it. I've seen painted, masked lords beat an old farmer to death with riding crops. To this day, I don't know why. Is that hate? I saw good, sensible men fight armored chevaliers with nothing, no weapons, no armies, not even hope of success, to see the occupation end. Is that hate? It seems more personal than just that. They made me watch while they held my mother down and raped her, then slit her throat when they were finished. Loghain found himself surprised that he was telling the elf this. They took whatever they wanted, and killed if you dared object. And Kaelin would have put us back under their boot heels. Jarath stared out over the ruins. Adea was a warrior, trained under the tutelage of Ferelden's greatest general. It's possible she could have defeated the men who had brutalized her son. His eyes grew distant as he stared into the fire. But one held a knife to his throat. Jarath's hand touched his throat in an unconscious gesture. When they were done using her, they bashed her skull with a rock. Blood made their hands slippery enough to pull free, and dive beneath the docks. Through the middens and junk piles, tunnels too small for them to follow. I've seen lordlings drag screaming girls away from their families, then 2 days later fished the girl's body out of the water by the docks. I've seen a few voices finally manage to make themselves heard for the injustice, and seen friends and family slaughtered in retaliation. I've walked through an orphanage where children were cut down in their beds. It's hate. And pretty words about it being in the past won't change it when it will only happen again tomorrow. And it wasn't done by Orlesians, or some foreign power. It was done on Merrick's watch, by his soldiers. It was done on Annera's watch, by her guards. It was done by the man you put in power, Loghain, to cause the consequences you used to justify selling my kin into slavery to furnish your little war. Enact my allies, the people in this world I'd even go so far as to consider my friends, considered so petty it wasn't even worth bringing up at the land's meet. Adea saved your life, Loghain. And it was Merrick's guardsmen who killed her, who threw her body on a midden heap. She won the Battle of Twin Hills for you and was murdered not by Orlesians, Loghain. Fereldens. Then your Tevinters came to sell Adea's husband into slavery. I understand your hatred, Loghain. I know the rage. The part I don't understand is your persistent delusion that Fereldens are any different. I didn't choose to join the Wardens either, Loghain. The words I used to conscript you are the same words Duncan used to conscript me. I slaughtered my way through the Arl of Denerim's estate. I used poison. I cut throats. I tore Vaughn's head off his shoulders. And I brought home the women he'd stolen, the women he'd raped, the body of the woman he murdered. That's when the guards, Annera's guards, finally decided to pay attention to what was happening. They came to the alienage with torches, prepared to burn down homes to find out who did it. So I took responsibility. And then Duncan conscripted me, right out from under the guards' noses. Denied that revenge for some pathetic human lordling, the guards came back later. Torches, plague, enough children slaughtered to tear the veil and give rage demons form. Bodies still rotting in their homes, an entire people abandoned to a place with no chance of being held against the blight. He crushed the cup in his hands. Loghain stared at him in silence. Shale was still off in the darkness somewhere, likely not even aware of the confrontation at the campfire. He was surprised to realize that Jarath had not been shouting at all. In fact, the young man's voice had never changed from his normal, calm-speaking voice. The swamp witch still appeared engrossed in her book, though he doubted she was ignoring the events as thoroughly as it appeared. He sighed. Why did you conscript me? It can't be for the reasons you gave the dwarf. You haven't figured that out yet. No. An idea came to him, as far-fetched as it seemed. The swamp witch. Jarath removed the daggers from his boots and set them on the rock next to him. My mother once told me that in all the world, there were only 2 humans she'd ever held any respect for. And that it always amused her that both had given her the same gift, a knife. He held up the first dagger, inlaid with a griffin on the handle. This one was given to her by Duncan. And so I accepted my conscription. He held up the second, its hilt carved to resemble a mulberry. This one. He shrugged. You recognize, I suppose. And I conscripted you. He replaced the knives. The swamp witch told me that life is full of circles and choices, and that little is as chance as it seems. Your mother didn't start out a night elf. Her brother was one, and she just sort of attached herself to the unit, running our errands. Bringing tea. My mother made you tea. Yes. And you. He frowned. Drank it. These were dark and troubled times. Believe it or not, I'd tasted worse. Loghain smiled a little at the memory. She was there when we were planning the Battle of Twin Hills. We needed a distraction, something to keep the Chevaliers from chasing us down on horseback after we cut the supply line. I had the Night Elves take position. The plan was they would pepper the Chevaliers with arrows, cut down their numbers that way. He shook his head. They were unneeded. Your mother crept into the Chevaliers' camp, just another young elf in servant's clothes. She cut the lines of their horses and set a tent on fire to start a stampede. We took the supply caravan with almost no casualties. He shrugged. I didn't know whether to spank her or give her a medal. So I gave her that dagger, told the others she was my personal servant and told her she was my new bodyguard. That kept her out of. He waved a hand. Most of the trouble. She'd been back in the alienage a year when Duncan came. Valandrian, our Harin, arranged a marriage for her to keep her out of the wardens. Arranged. Most elfish marriages are arranged. My own was. You are married. No. I was conscripted. The women Vaughn carried off. He twitched a shoulder. That was at what was to have been the wedding. It never took place. I see. Still, I'm surprised Adaya agreed to an arranged marriage. She wasn't happy about the idea, at first, she told me. Then she met my father. Duncan thought about inviting her to join the wardens, but decided against it. Jarath met Loghain's eyes. Perhaps he made a mistake there. Would you have listened to Adaya? No. Loghain sighed. I may have treated her with more respect than I did Duncan, but I would not have heeded her warnings either. I knew the Darkspawn were a threat, but I still considered Orlais the greater threat. And now? The dragon, the one in our dreams. He frowned. That is the archdemon. Yes. Loghain couldn't quite prevent a shudder. Feeling it, being so close to this many Darkspawn, this is why you brought me back to Ostagar. Yes. It's not just Ferelden at risk, anymore. It's all of Thedas. Loghain glanced back at where the ruins could just be made out in the distance. What do they do with the ones they drag off alive? The men are the lucky ones. They get eaten. The women get turned into brood mothers, Darkspawn that make more darkspawn. You know this. I've seen it. He actually shuddered. A dwarven woman, named Laren. The Darkspawn corrupted her, made her eat her own kinfolk, including her husband. Did you? I killed her. She almost returned the favor. There were. Loghain swallowed. Women, among the soldiers at Ostagar. And among the few servants that remained, yes. Genlocks come from dwarven brood mothers, Hurlocks from human. The shrieks come from elfish brood mothers. It's likely the ogres are a result of Qunari brood mothers, but we haven't found any yet to confirm. That is. He nodded. A profoundly disturbing thing to consider. Hespeth set it to poetry. Hespeth. A dwarven woman, in the process of being turned into a brood mother. I killed her too. The Darkspawn come from us. Each village they take, each alienage, each group of refugees, they can make more brood mothers, increase their numbers still further. Once they take Ferelden, they will take Thedas. We must stop them. Welcome to the Grey Wardens, Loghain. Brujn shattered the Genlock's skull. Despite being mortally wounded, the wolf locked her jaw onto the emissary, bearing the creature down. The emissary stabbed the wolf in the side again, and the wolf went still. Brujn avenged her a moment later by smashing the thing's skull. Leliana looked around. Was that all of them? Scouts or stragglers, Brujn said. He cast his senses. No more in my range. He started to turn towards her, then heard a sound. He walked in its direction. Ah, so that's why she didn't run. What? The wolf. He bent, picking up the pup. It couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. She was protecting her baby. Oh, it's adorable. Leliana petted it gently. We aren't going to leave it, are we? It started licking his face. Leliana giggled. He sighed. No, I suppose we aren't. They were only a day out from Redcliffe when Loghain brought Jarath a cup of the tea. I am. He sighed. Sorry. Oh. Faradea. Please believe that if I had known, I would have seen justice done for her. She'd saved his life. He never even knew she had a son. They died for it. The last two were at Ostagar. I found one. Jarath smiled at the memory. The other was in the Royal Guard. Justice, such as it is, was done. I see. Made no difference, either way. No matter how many you kill in the name of justice, ashes will not become flesh, and the dead do not return. I could bring down a horde to ravage Denerim, and it would change nothing. Hate is a childish thing, Loghain. We no longer have the luxury of being children. Are you really going to keep that mangy thing? Braska asked. Brujn raised an eyebrow at him. We let you keep Zevran. Zevran doesn't bite. Lenore started to say. And he doesn't have fleas. I think it's adorable, Lenore said, reaching over to pat the puppy. What are you going to call him? She bounced excitedly. You could call him Dragon. No, he's too adorable to be a dragon, Leliana said. Whiskers. You can't call a wolf Whiskers. It's beneath his dignity, Lenore replied. Brujn just sighed as the two began to run through names. Now you've gone and done it, Songbird. They are going to agree on something stupid, and that poor mutt is going to be stuck with it. Emishem. Emishem Nan, your revenge is swift. And yet, I'm still waiting. Chapter 35, The Gathering Storm. Jarath arrived back in Denerim 2 days after they did. He wisely left Loghain behind when coming to give his report. After he'd handed everything to Eamon, Sedida fell into step with him as they went downstairs. I don't owe you an apology, she said. I never believed you did. Why did you recruit Loghain? I told you why. Now I want the rest of the reason. He shook his head. Because while it's Alistair's country, it's Loghain's army. Their general will fight alongside them, and so they will fight for Alistair. Because I believe you would have regretted manipulating Anara's execution for the rest of your life, all the more because you told yourself it was justice for Duncan. Because wardens do what they must, and that duty cannot be forsworn. Because enough have died in this stupid war. Because Alistair's reign should not begin in blood. Because I am Fereldan, and he is the hero of the River Dane. He sighed. Choose your reason, said Ida. I weighed them all. She looked at him, then shook her head slowly. Are you sure you are only 16? It's what my father tells me, anyway. He slung the pack off his shoulder, then removed the blades from inside. He handed them to her. I thought he'd want you to have these. Thank you, Jarath. Cathiel nearly snarled at him. If I despise you, it's because you deserve it. Loghain merely stared at her. Ah, now there's the venom I expected. Well, is that it? Surely you've more to say to me than that. Go on. Try out all the curses and insults you know. I'll teach you some new ones if they don't suffice. You're awfully smug for a failure. Ah, now that actually struck a glancing blow. Good work. And now what? Am I to be some trophy of your victory? The defeated enemy you drag about on a leash wherever you go? Or have you some worse fate in mind for me? Just stay out of my way. Or what? You'll kill me? Go ahead. The joining was my death sentence anyway. It's hardly my fault it failed to produce the desired result, Warden. This is still your death sentence. Remember that. I assure you, it's foremost on my mind. Sedida wanted to hit them both. Perhaps you two could simply avoid each other. Loghain actually smirked at her. I'd be delighted to. It is, however, a small camp. We could dig a moat down the middle of it, perhaps. It will create some difficulty finding a place to pitch tents, I'm afraid. She wanted to reach for her blade. Loghain, just do as you are told. Loghain glared at Leliana. So you are a Fereldan girl, who decided to live in Orlais. She turned her nose up at him. I did not decide to live in Orlais. My mother took me there with her. I know how you feel about the Orlesians, but I am not one of them. You may as well be. You grew up there. Your views and values are theirs. Loghain, I have heard you speaking with the others. You find Fereldan unsophisticated, barely civilized. No, this is not true. You're painted to look like you're a Fereldan, but scratch the surface and find nothing but Orlais underneath. Burhan stepped between them, his eyes narrow. Halam Solin, Esar2 Enalin Mme. Loghain shook his head, and left them be. Loghain saw Wyn looking at him again. You can stop scowling at me, madam. Did I need your permission? I see. He rolled his eyes. Fine. I confess, it was entirely my idea that Uldred consort with demons. I had a dastardly scheme in which the utter destruction of Fereldan's best weapon would benefit me, personally. Are you satisfied now? Do you think your deal with Uldred was where you earned my contempt? I was at Ostagar. I witnessed Kaelin's murder. He smirked. Such loyalty. She folded her arms. What is that supposed to mean? Did you try to save him, then? My apologies. Wyn's hand tightened on her staff. I was fortunate to escape with my life. So you didn't rush to your king's rescue? I see. Then both of us left the boy to die. I was no general at the head of an army. I could never have reached him. And I had no magic that could break those darkspawn ranks. But perhaps you think I ought to have tried, regardless. No doubt, the lives of mere soldiers are cheap in the eyes of the Circle. And what of all the soldiers who died with their king? Their lives were worth nothing to you. That one actually struck. You think so, do you? I knew their names, Mage, and where they came from. I knew their families. I do not know how you mages determine the value of things, but they were my men. I know exactly how much I lost that day. The young mage immediately came to the aid of the old one. What are you playing at? I beg your pardon. He raised an eyebrow at her. Lenor's eyes narrowed. Don't think a few friendly words to Jarath will put him off his guard. He's no fool. None of us have forgotten what you've done. I have no idea what you are trying to suggest. If the mage thought he was actually manipulating that confounding young man. Wyn shook her head. Oh, There are so many things to accuse you of, Logain Mactir, that I hardly know where to begin. But we can save that for another time. For the moment, know that we are watching you. He wanted to throw up his hands. If watching me amuses you, feel free. Now, if you don't mind, I have things to attend to. Redcliffe is under attack. Shale made a sighing sound. Is anybody surprised? Anyone? Jarath, take Logain, Morrigan, Shale, and Okaren and clear out the lower section. The rest of you, with me, Setida ordered. Jarath immediately nodded and gestured for them to follow him. She's still angry at you, Morrigan told Jarath. Why do you say that? Logain asked her. She stuck him with Okaren. I heard that, Okaren said, and belched. Riordan met them in the hall. It is a relief to see you unharmed. What news? Setida asked. The darkspawn that attacked Redcliffe were relatively few in number, I'm afraid. It was assumed the horde was marching in this direction, but that is not true. Eamon joined them, sparing a glare for Logain. Riordan tells us that the bulk of the horde is, in fact, heading towards Denerim. They will be at the capital within the week. Are you sure? Riordan glanced at Eamon, then nodded. I ventured close enough to listen in, as it were. I am quite certain. Jarath frowned. Why then did you say it was headed here? Riordan shook his head. The darkspawn line is wide, and many of them roam away from the main horde. Until now most of them have been spotted here in the west. Alistair pointedly did not look at Logain. Not to mention that we've been too busy killing each other to pay much attention to some silly old darkspawn horde. Riordan inhaled. There is, I'm afraid, one other piece of news that is of even greater concern. The archdemon has shown itself. The dragon is at the head of the horde. Maker preserve us, Tegan swore softly. But we can't reach Denerim within a week, can we? It's too far, Alistair frowned. We must begin a forced march to the capital immediately, with what we have. Denerim must be defended at all costs. The archdemon is what's important, Jarath said. Riordan nodded to him. And only the Grey Wardens can defeat the archdemon. That is why we must go. Then we march, Alistair said. And hope the army we've collected here give us the chance we need. He squared his shoulders. Arleman, how long before the army can set out? By daybreak. Alistair nodded, and gave the order. Then let's get them ready. I won't let all those people die without giving them a chance. I would like to speak with just the wardens, if I may, Riordan said. There are a few things we need to discuss. We will be along shortly, Alistair told him. Riordan gathered the wardens in his room. His face was grave. You are all here. You are new to the Grey Wardens, and you may not have been told how an archdemon is slain. I need to know if that is so. Alistair pointedly did not look at where Logain was standing. You mean there's more to it than just, say, chopping off its head? Riordan sighed. So it is true. Duncan had not yet told you. I had simply assumed. He shook his head. Tell me, have you ever wondered why the Grey Wardens are needed to defeat the Darkspawn? Lenore nodded. It obviously has something to do with the taint within us. That is exactly what it involves. The archdemon may be slain as any other Darkspawn, but should any other than a Grey Warden to the slaying, it will not be enough. The essence of the beast will pass through the taint to the nearest Darkspawn and will be reborn anew in that body. The dragon is thus all but immortal. But if the archdemon is slain by a Grey Warden, its essence travels into the Grey Warden, instead. And Burhan asked the question for them. What happens to the Grey Warden? A Darkspawn is an empty, soulless vessel, but a Grey Warden is not. The essence of the archdemon is destroyed, and so is the Grey Warden. Meaning? Alistair looked down. The Grey Warden who kills the archdemon. He turned to look at Cathiel, then back at Riordan. Does. Yes. Without the archdemon, the blight ends. It is the only way. Setida hooked her thumbs behind her weapons, and nodded. So it's up to us to kill this thing. In Blight's past, when the time came, the eldest of the Grey Wardens would decide which amongst them would take that final blow. If possible, the final blow should be mine to make. I am the eldest, and the taint will not spare me much longer. But if I fail, the deed falls on you. The blight must be stopped now or it will destroy all of Ferelden before the rest of the Grey Wardens can assemble. Remember that. But enough. There will be much to do tomorrow, and little enough time to rest before it. I will let you return to your rooms. I will see you once the army is ready to march, then. Alistair gave him a respectful nod. I guess this ends soon, one way or another. That it does, my friend, that it does. Cetadel lingered in the hall, watching Alistair take Cathiel's hand as they walked. Braska and Lenore also held hands. Brehon walked past his room, and she was sure he was off to seek Leliana. One life. She jumped at the sound of Loghain's voice. She hadn't realized he and Jarath were still behind her. After all this trouble, it seems like such a small thing to give up to see this land safe, doesn't it? It's hardly a small price. Jarath twitched a shoulder. Isn't it? Seems to be the currency these days. You pay it, and hope that the outcome is worthwhile. Are you willing to accept death if Riordan fails? Loghain gave her a look that suggested she was being ridiculous. If it comes to that, yes. Gladly. If anyone should make this sacrifice, it ought to be me. Maker knows, I have enough to atone for. This was always meant to end in death, Jarath said. Join us, brothers and sisters. Join us in the shadows where we stand, vigilant. Join us as we carry the duty that cannot be forsworn. And should you perish, know that your sacrifice will not be forgotten and that one day, we shall join you. So who gets to decide who lives and dies? Cetida asked. You're commanding the armies you've raised, aren't you? Jarath raised an eyebrow at her. Isn't that what you were born to do? She sighed. I didn't think of it that way. Loghain nodded at her reluctantly. I can offer advice, if you want, but this is your battle. This army was built from nothing by you. They don't follow me. And if I make mistakes, what then? You'll deal with the results just like everyone else, Loghain said. If Riordan can't, I'll be the one to make the sacrifice. Jarath shook his head at her. What makes you think that choice is yours to make? As you pointed out, I'm the commander here. Yes. You are. The general leads. The pawns make the sacrifice. Do you think the need for a leader will die along with the archdemon? Cetida turned to face him, giving him a long, appraising look. His face was expressionless, but for the first time, she wondered how much of it was a mask. You are saying I should sacrifice one of you? Yes. His voice was blunt. Her own voice became angry. And what if I pick you? He shrugged. Then I die a full year later than I would have had I never become a warden at all, and I go out a hero on top of everything. Maybe the dwarves will put my face up on one of those statues. You. She frowned at him. You are actually joking about this. You find death amusing. Depends upon who is doing the dying. I think, all things considered, my dying to save this. He twitched a shoulder. Human kingdom would have the Maker laughing hard enough to fall out of his throne. Laughing at death. She sighed. It's a city elf thing. When one is visited by an old friend, jokes and laughter are often to be expected. We've spent too much time in the company of death to start pretending it is some fearsome stranger. I remain your sword, Cetida. Sleep well. Jarath. Yes. You aren't my sword. You are my friend. All of you. I don't want to see any of you die. Then close your eyes. There are plenty who could show you how. He watched Cetida walk away. It's not her. Then after Riordan, it falls to me, Loghain said. Or me. Either way, it's not her. Or any of the rest of them. The world has further need of their like. Indeed. This next part won't be easy. If it were easy, they wouldn't need us. Cetida found Alistair and Cathiel in the common room. I take it everyone else was smart enough to get some sleep. You know, you'd think being king and queen would get us some respect around here, Alistair said, looking at Cathiel. I treat you with as much respect as I ever have any royalty. Cathiel laughed. Fair point. The laugh died, leaving the room feeling empty. The silence grew, becoming awkward. So? Alistair said. If Riordan fails. Cathiel shrugged. Then we feed Loghain to the Archdemon and kill two birds with one stone. Set it aside. A suggestion he recently made himself, in fact. And if he refuses? Alistair's voice was angry. What then? Then I suppose it falls to me. Setita's voice was firm. Or to the last of us standing, should it come to that. I wonder why Duncan didn't tell us this before. Alistair leaned back in his chair. Cathiel set her hand on his. Probably because he intended to take the blow himself, and didn't want you to argue with him. I suppose you are right. He closed his fingers around hers. It will be over soon, one way or another. Get some sleep. That's an order, Your Majesties. You know, for a princess, you really don't seem to get how royalty works. Bed. Fine, fine, we are going, put down the sword. You did good today, Alistair, Setita said. He smiled at her. Leliana traced her finger across Brehon's chest as she listened to his heartbeat. She took a deep breath. So one of you is going to die, and you can't tell me why. All of us could die, Ma Arlath. He kissed the top of her head. Oddish Aldinan Shirel. Ma Gilina, Ma Melava Halani. Ma La Soladin Nadas, Ma Vihanan. Arabellas. He stroked her hair. If it comes to me, I will do what I must. The blight will end. I love you. She kissed him. My raven. Arlath Ma. He returned the kiss. My nightingale. So, fireball. Braska looked up at Lenore. This could. I don't want to talk about it. Lenore shook her head. We. Zevran. Lenore turned to the elf. He's still talking. Get me some rope. Zevran saluted. Aye. Lenore ran her fingers through his hair. Trust me, Braska. Her grin was evil. You deserve everything Zev and I are about to do to you. Cathiel, I just want you to know. You aren't going to die. Cathiel caught him and swung him around to face her. We. You. She narrowed her eyes. Are. Not. Going. To. Die. She shook her head. I have lost too much. I will not lose you. She kissed him. You are not allowed to die. Ever. Maker, I love you. He held her to him. Griffin woofed. Cadden. Setita glanced over her shoulder. Salroka. She looked out the window. It's odd, in a way. I've spent so much time trying to get us to this point that I never really considered what might happen after. She shook her head. Either things are about to change drastically, or we are all about to die horrible screaming deaths. I will hope for the former. Sten's lips twitched just slightly. Been on the road a while, no. She shrugged. Maybe next I'll go see where they are keeping wisdom. Could use a little. Wisdom is like breath. You need it, but no other can give you theirs. What do you have priests for, then? Guides along the path to mastery. You build roads, but you must walk them with your own feet. There are roads aplenty, out there. She nodded to the window. I think what we really need is some bridges. She was standing by his fire when he entered the room. Do not be alarmed. It is only I. Morrigan? Is everything all right? There was something in her voice. I am well. She turned to face him. 'Tis you who are in danger. I have a plan, you see. A way out. The loop in your hole. I know what happens when the Archdemon dies. I know a Grey Warden must be sacrificed, and that sacrifice could be you. I have come to tell you this does not need to be. It was time, then. The pieces were arranged on the board, and it was time for the endgame. And how do you know about this? I know a great many things. How I know is not quite as important as what I am offering you, however. I offer a way out. A way out for all the Grey Wardens, that there need be no sacrifice. A ritual. She gestured. Performed on the eve of battle, in the dark of night. He began removing his armor. Nothing comes without a price. Perhaps. But that price need not be so unbearable, especially if there is much to be gained. All I ask is that you listen to what I have to offer, nothing more. Very well. She'd waited this long. What is your plan? What I propose is this: lay with me. Here, tonight. And from our joining, a child will be conceived. The child will bear the taint, and when the archdemon is slain, its essence will seek the child like a beacon. At this early stage, the child can absorb that essence and not perish. The archdemon is still destroyed, with no Grey Warden dying in the process. He was angry. Angrier than he'd been since the rage had filled him. His voice remained calm. It all comes back to joining, doesn't it? He turned to face her. Are you insane? This is your plan. Think about what I offer you, the chance to avoid death. Or better yet, the chance to slay the archdemon and live as a hero. No Grey Warden has ever done this. He laughed at her. If you want someone who cares about either of those things, I suggest you go knock on Brujin's door. Or Alistair's. You want to? He clenched his fists. Have my child? Make it Darkspawn. No. I conceive a child, one who will be born with the soul of an old god. I seek the essence of the old god that once was and not the dark forces that corrupted it. Some things are worth preserving in this world. Make of that what you will. After this is done, you allow me to walk away. She met his eyes. And you do not follow. Ever. This child will be mine to raise as I wish. He wasn't sure if that were better or worse. What do you intend to do with this child? I do not wish to tell you. His voice held a blade. I insist. The child will represent freedom for an ancient power, a chance to be reborn apart from the taint. Is that not reason enough to do it? I will raise the child apart from the rest of society, and teach it to respect that from which it came. Beyond that, you need know nothing else. He needed to know so much more. I see. Is this why you've been so? He fought to keep his fists from clenching. Friendly to me? Caring for you as I've come to. She shook her head. That was not part of the plan. But I cannot let what I feel interfere with what I must do. This is important to me. The fact that it may save your life makes me all the more determined to see it done. Please do not. She sighed. Cloud the issue. If you feel anything for me, then accept that it will make what we must do. She started to extend a hand, and then reconsidered. That much easier. Will I ever see you again? He wished the answer didn't matter to him so much. After the archdemon has been slain. No. No, you will never see me again. Refuse my offer, however, and I leave now. This is. She looked down. Simply how it must be. He stood in silence for several minutes, staring at the wall. Finally, he turned to look at her. 1 year. 1 year. I give you 1 year. Then I start looking for you. You get what you want, the child. But as you pointed out, that means I may well live. And as long as I live, I will seek you. You, of all people, should know this. I accept who I am, or go knock on another door. Very well. He met her eyes. All right. I agree. A wise decision. Come, my love. Put the thoughts of the ritual aside and let us make this last night together one to remember. It started again when they made camp. Okaren stretched his legs to ensure there was no room on the log for Loghain to sit. He belched, then looked up. So what, now we're supposed to be best friends? Bosom buddies? Sit around the campfire and sing together. Loghain began to take his plate elsewhere. Somehow, I have no desire to hear you sing, dwarf. Okaren spat. Just don't start thinking that you belong here. Oh, I'm in no danger of that, I promise you. Good, Alistair muttered. Jarath slammed the teacup he was drinking from down hard enough for the metal to break. Enough. Bloody legends all. Davith was a common pickpocket. Broska was a hired thug. Riordan a thief. Duncan, Alistair, Duncan, was conscripted after committing theft and murder of a Grey Warden, I might add. Criminals and malcontents, glory-seeking fools, and those who wish only to die. Blood mages and rebels. Unrepentant murderers, paragons, kingslayers, and kings. We are wardens. Now would you people kindly shut the hell up? We've got a long day of killing Darkspawn and saving this blasted kingdom tomorrow. He glared around the camp, challenge written on his face. Feet shuffled. For a moment, there was silence. You heard the man, everyone. Get some sleep. Most scattered, leaving only Setida, Loghain, and Jarath at the fire. Loghain was looking at Jarath with an expression she'd last seen on her own father's face, paternal pride. Jarath, Loghain, I apologize to you both. I should not have allowed the bickering to go on as long as it did. Loghain sighed. Also apologize. I should not have tried to draw anyone into a fight. Jarath raised an eyebrow as they both looked at him. I apologize for calling Davith common. The man deserved more respect than that. Loghain gave him a confused look as Setida merely laughed. Sleep well. Both of you. Do you think Alistair will be a better king than Kaelin? Jarath shrugged. Admittedly, my expectations for human kings are fairly low. He leaned into her as she sat beside him. I have something for you. What have you there? A mirror? It is. Her voice softened. Just the same as the mirror which Flemeth smashed on the ground, so long ago. It is incredible that you found one so like it. I am uncertain what to say. You must wish something in return, certainly. It's simply a present. For a beautiful woman. I have. She touched it almost reverently. Never received a gift. Not one that did not also come with a price attached. For a moment, he thought she was actually going to cry. But I would be a fool not to accept such a gesture with grace. Your gift is. Her smile trembled. Most thoughtful. Thank you. Chapter 36, Sacrifice. Before us stands the might of the Darkspawn Horde. Gaze upon them now, but fear them not. Those standing with me are Grey Wardens. They have survived, despite the odds, and without them, none of us would be here. Alistair gestured to Setida. The Warden Commander was not born to Ferelden, but she fights with honor and passion. Today, we save Denerim. Today, we avenge the death of my brother, King Kaelin. But most of all, today we show the Grey Wardens that we remember and honor their sacrifice. For Ferelden. For the Grey Wardens. The army charged. The arrows of the Dalish hunters crashed into the Darkspawn ahead of the charging humans and dwarves. As the armies clashed, the hunters focused their fire on the Darkspawn emissaries and archers on the heights, preventing them from raining death on the soldiers. And then the gate was theirs. You've managed to fight your way to the gates. We're doing better than I hoped. Bloody nug runners. We're outnumbered 3-1. Okaren shook his head. Bah, you say that like we haven't had worse odds, Broska said. Riordan shook his head. The army will not last long, so we'll need to move quickly to reach the Archdemon. He looked around. We're going to need to reach a high point in the city. I'm thinking the top of Fort Dricken might work. Draw the dragon's attention, Setida nodded. We have little choice, though I warn you that as soon as we engage the beast it will call all its generals to help it. Brühen. Setida said, turning to him. He closed his eyes. 2. One is in the market, near the chantry. The other is in the alienage. The market doesn't have a lot of spawn, but those it does have are ogres. There are also ogres between us and Fort Dricken, as well as a fair number of emissaries. Seeking them out will be wise, Loghain said. Not to mention killing them will help the civilians still in Denerim. Jarath, take Loghain, Morrigan, and Shale, and deal with the one in the alienage. Sten, you've got Okaren and Win. Hold the gates. Brühen, I need your ears. Take Leliana and get Riordan past the spawn. We'll keep the pressure up on the generals, give you a clear line. The rest of you are with me. Cathiel didn't want to think about it, but there was a very real chance this was goodbye. Wynne smiled at her. All that we've been through has led up to this. Whatever happens now, to any of us, know that I am proud, infinitely proud, to have called you my friends. May the Maker watch over you. Okaren nodded. So this is it. It's been an honor to fight with you, Okaren, Setida told him. He shook his head. Honor? Nobody's looked at me and seen honor in a long time, Warden. You took in a drunken disgrace of an Orzammar warrior. You gave me a reason to fight and the will to keep going. Hell, those two birds even helped me find the one woman in the sodding world who might put up with me. I owe you a lot. I consider it a fine honor to die for you and your cause. He put both hands on his axe. Let the stone turn red from the blood of heroes. Today I will be the warrior you taught me to be. I would almost say that I feel concern for something other than myself, even maybe for certain soft, squishy companions. Shale shook her head. But that would be silly, wouldn't it? It's scandalous to even consider the notion, Lenore said. I know. Please do not tell anyone. I doubt I could blush, but it would be so awkward. She shook her massive head. And? She hesitated. Do try not to get swallowed whole. If the beast were to fly about afterwards and poop it out, irony would dictate that it would land on me. I couldn't take it. You have carried us this far, Sten said, looking at Setida. Do not doubt that. All right, people. We have a job to do. She drew her sword. It won't be easy. She smiled. But as a smart-ass elf once said, if it was easy, someone else would do it. Let's move. Alistair caught Cathiel's hand. So this could be it. Soon this will be finished, one way or another. I love you, Alistair. And I love you. Always. He kissed her. She held him for a moment. On the other side of the field, she saw Bruhan and Leliana doing the same thing. Beside them, Braska, Lenore, and Zevran kept touching each other's hands. Jarath was already moving towards the alienage. She took a breath, and followed Setida. Braska and Zevran moved almost as a single being. The dwarf would hamstring the ogre, while the elf would come in high, slashing at the throat as the ogre fell. Cathiel kept up a stream of arrows, retrieving as they moved. She saw Setida take an ogre's hand off at the wrist before disemboweling it. And at the back of their group, Lenore rained lightning down, taking advantage of the storm that was starting to rage above them. Now and then they found guards, still fighting the good fight, but most were fleeing alongside the panicked civilians. Lenore only barely managed to counter the spell the general threw at them. She gritted her teeth. Move, I can't hold it long. Alistair charged. He slammed his shield into the Darkspawn's face. It tried to hit him with its staff, and he broke the staff with a blow from his sword. It threw fire at him, and he blocked it with his shield before bringing his sword down. The head fell to the ground, and rolled. Cathiel saw the ogre bearing down on him, and put an arrow in its eye. It fell, and Alistair turned, and brought his sword down to finish the thing off. Around them, cheers started to go up. She even heard a few cheering the name of King Alistair, and saw a look of wonder cross her beloved's face. Zevran and Braska were supporting Lenore. She dug a lyrium potion out of her belt pouch, and drank it. Then she took a second. Setida gave her a worried look. Lenore. Lenore's face was calm, almost serene. Let's finish this, Commander. Jarath moved through the alienage. He could sense the Darkspawn at the other end. As he entered the square, he saw Shiani marshalling defenders. He caught a look of stunned surprise on Loghain's face as the elves prepared to hold their homes, some armed with no more than shovels. Cousin. Shiani's face broke into a wide smile. Oh, am I glad to see you. The alienage is under attack. She pointed. There is a large group of Darkspawn approaching and the gates won't hold. We need your help. That's why we are here, Jarath said. Then we will stand with you. She held up her bow, her eyes determined. This is our home and we're not going to let it fall. We're with you. Other voices called out. Tell us what to do, Shiani said as she fell into step beside him. And we'll fight for as long as we can. Put your archers on the roofs. When the gate falls, draw them back there, to the choke point. He smiled. Shale, hold that point. Keep them off the archers. You, and you, if you don't have bows, throw rocks. You four, hold the stairs to the towers. Morrigan, I want you up in the tower there. Focus on weakening their lines. Logain, you're with me. Shiani blinked and gave Logain a disbelieving look. Then she laughed. You heard what he said? Come on. He moved to the gate, Logain a pace behind. Logain shook his head. Maker, I actually think they'll hold. Of course they'll hold, Jarath said. His smile was fierce and proud. They are my people. Focus on the big ones. Yes, sir, Logain said. Jarath glanced at him, and the man smiled. She told him to hold the gates. He would have preferred to have the bare sod behind him. The humans had uncertain looks on their faces. Next to him, the dwarf stood, his axe in hand. The mage, odd how he no longer thought of her as Sarbis, stood to one side, out of the way but prepared to render aid. The girl had left her hound with the order to guard Wynn, and the hound stood firm, prepared to fill its role. After Setida and Jarath, he thought he liked the hound best. Asila was in his hand. She told him to hold the gates. The first wave came. Burhan tracked the movements. We need to do up. Over the roofs. Riordan nodded. He grabbed hold of the sign over the merchant's door, and used it to pull himself up. Burhan held his linked hands for Leliana, then hoisted her up before pulling himself up after. He nodded, and moved, knowing they would follow. They leaped from roof to roof. Burhan left his hammer in the back sheath, returning to the longbow. They attacked only when needed, to prevent attention from being drawn to them. He jumped to the next roof, then caught Riordan's hand as the man nearly fell. There is an army between us and the gate of Drikan. He narrowed his eyes, then looked at Riordan. How are you at mountain climbing? Setida sent Braska, Lenore, and Zevran down one alley, and gestured for Cathiel and Alistair to follow her down the other. They cleared the emissaries as they went, creating a path for civilians to flee and soldiers to enter. Seeing their king fighting for them seemed to give the people hope. Now and then she saw civilians pick up the weapons of the fallen and join the fight, holding the Darkspawn back so that others could flee. A boy, no more than 10, stood with a sword in his hand, while two little girls tried to pull a toddler to safety. A genlock charged, and then Alistair was there, his shield between the Darkspawn and the children. A heartbeat later, there were a dozen guards there, fighting alongside their king, as other civilians got the children to safety. More Darkspawn started to charge, and then a storm exploded in their midst. Setida looked past them to see Lenore. Her hair stood out around her like a corona as she held her staff high, calling lightning down among the shrieks. Wow, Cathiel said. Setida grinned. Come on, people. Let's not keep the archdemon waiting. The gate fell. He fought back to back with Logain. The human used his shield as a weapon as he laid about with his blade. Jarath spun, sword in one hand, axe in the other. Morrigan's spells fell among the Darkspawn, holding them in place for the arrows of the elven archers. Only a few Hurlocks got past them. None of those got past the fists of Shale. There, Jarath said. The general. Let me guess, Logain said. He's the one behind the three ogres. It's far too late for you to die young, Logain. Give me a boost. Logain looked at him, then nodded. He dropped to one knee, holding his shield. Jarath leapt, landing on the shield, and Logain lifted as the elf jumped again, going over the heads of the ogres. He rolled, came up on his feet, and drove the blade into the heart of the general. The firestorm the beast had been gathering dissipated. He turned as the ogres did. Logain drove his sword through the back of the first as Jarath came at the second. Shiani gave an order, and the third began to grow a garden of arrows as stones seemed to strike it from every angle. Shale strode forward, lifted a fist, and smashed the last genlock to the ground in a splash of blood and gore. Jarath cast his senses. That's all of. He blinked. Shiani, get them under cover, go. You heard him, Shiani shouted. Loghain shook his head. It was coming. The other side of the bridge. Shale, move, Jarath yelled, and they turned to run. The golem had barely made it to the other side when the fire hit the bridge, obliterating it. The archdemon roared a challenge as it climbed again. A raven circled Jarath, then landed to become Morrigan. We have drawn its attention. To Fort Draken, Jarath ordered. Time to kill a god. The dwarf may have been a drunk. He may have been crude. But she told him to hold the gates. And the dwarf did. The humans rallied to them, shield and blade. For a moment, he was back with his brothers, in the heart of Seharan. An ogre fell. No more came. She told him to hold the gates, and the gates held. A cheer went up among the defenders. Slowly, a smile spread across his face. There were no humans among the dead. They'd held. Shall I send word that the gates are secured? A human asked. For the moment, yes, Sten told him. Right away. It was up to the wardens now. Burhan gave Riordan a hand up. The other warden nodded. Leliana looked out over the city. Maker, look at them all. He cast out his senses, then smiled. The generals are down. The others are on their way. There, Riordan said. The archdemon was coming their way. Riordan adjusted his grip on his blades, and started to run. As the archdemon passed, he leaped. Burhan unlimbered the hammer from his back. Ma Arlath. Vihanan. She said, turning to him. Do you know how to work a ballista? She saw the figure fall from the back of the archdemon. For a moment, she hated herself for hoping it was Riordan, and not Burhan. Whoever it had been, their sacrifice had not been in vain. The archdemon faltered, and landed atop the fort. It's down. Let's go, Setida said. The darkspawn pressed them back, away from the gate. Lenore staggered, and fumbled for her belt pouch as the emissary gathered another spell. Setida glanced towards Cathiel, and realized the woman was armed with long knives, having run out of arrows. Fire began to gather, and then the emissary's head was rolling across the floor. She saw a familiar figure standing behind it. Shale, get that gate open, Jarath ordered. Morrigan, the archers. Loghain stood next to the elf, shield at the ready. The darkspawn turned towards them, moving in. An anvil. The gate opened. Setida smiled. Time to bring the hammer. Zevran and Braska made short work of the traps. Cathiel had retrieved additional arrows, and Setida almost absently noted that Alistair was carrying a few extra quivers. Lenore and Morrigan were both downing lyrium potions. It's on the roof, Setida said. It's not alone. There are darkspawn with it now, and more on the way. I saw someone fall, Lenore said. Riordan, Jarath said. You sure? Setida asked. We. Jarath nodded. Saw him land. He brought it down, Alistair said. We have a chance. We are almost to the roof, Setida said. The blight ends here. So we head to the end together, as it should be. Morrigan looked at him. Once this is done, no matter how it turns out I will be gone. You are aware of this, yes. Then let me thank you now, for what you have done. Unshed tears shone in her eyes. There is far more I might have done for you, had this been another time and we, been different people. She drew a breath. Allow me to say only one thing before we go. I was foolish. This could have been so much easier, yet I cannot regret what was between us. She met his eyes. I will always remember you, my love. You know where to find me. She smiled. Let us see this finally done. The archdemon awaits. They started up the stairs. Loghain fell into step next to him, and met his eyes. In a quiet voice, he said, It was an honor to fight at your side, however briefly. The fight is not over yet. He no longer worried about finding specific targets for the hammer. His swings now were merely to keep them back. Leliana loaded another bolt into the ballista. The 3 previous shots had bounced off the archdemon's hide, but they had served to keep the beast from trying to retake the air. The door opened. He saw the others pour onto the roof. The hammer knocked a hurlock over the edge. Those at the base of the stairs began to turn, heading towards the others. Vihanan. Keep firing. If it takes off, he died for nothing. She shifted the aim, and fired. Cathiel saw the ballista bolt catch the archdemon's wing as it turned to face them. She spared only a glance for its source. Leliana and Bruhan were still in the fight. Cathiel, Lenore, Morrigan, take the heights. Shale, hold those stairs. Zevran, Braska, go left. Jarath, Loghain, go right. Alistair, with me. Setida began moving forward. The Darkspawn tried to rally to protect their master. Many fell before they even reached the blades of the Wardens, as the arrows and spells of the others rained down. Tendrils of dark energy snared Darkspawn and flung them from the heights as Morrigan unleashed her spells. Fire swept through their ranks, as Lenore brought forth an inferno. And then, the way was clear. She saw another ballista bolt fire as the archdemon attempted to launch itself at them. The beast roared in frustration. They hit it almost simultaneously, using wolf pack tactics. When it turned its attention to one group, the other two groups hit it with everything they had. Cathiel saw Loghain standing alone, and realized with a start that Jarath had once again jumped atop something big enough to swallow him whole. It moved too much for him to climb the neck. He drove his blade instead into its shoulder, and it staggered, lamed. He tumbled lightly to the ground, landing on his feet. It turned towards him, enraged, and Alistair took the opportunity to drive his blade into and beneath its other shoulder. He had to move backwards, quickly, only barely managing to get his shield up in time as it started to breath fire. Setida moved in front of him, bringing her own shield to form a wall. That's when Zevran and Braska hit it from underneath, driving their blades into it. Their daggers weren't long enough to pierce vital organs, but the beast nearly swallowed the breath it was spewing at Alistair and Setida. It roared and leapt backwards, spreading its wings as it reared. And a ballista bolt hit it in the stomach. It fell. Setida looked at the archdemon, struggling to rise. She glanced back at her fellow wardens, panting with their exertions. Loghain was the first to speak. Let. Jarath didn't bother with words. He was moving before Setida had a chance to react. Jarath. Loghain lunged forward, trying to grab the elf, but he did not move quickly enough. Light exploded out of the archdemon as Jarath's blade penetrated its skull. Jarath held the sword as it shook, his own body seemingly vibrating with the energy flowing out. Setida closed her eyes, unwilling to watch him die. Silence. She opened her eyes. The archdemon's remains were there on the rooftop, a ring of what appeared to be soot surrounding them. And there, standing in the rain, Jarath, sheathing his blade as though it were just another ordinary kill. Below, she could see the Darkspawn starting to flee, the people starting to cheer. And Jarath, rising and walking back to his companions. Jarath. Yes. What just happened? The archdemon is dead. And you are alive. He shrugged. There are many mysteries in the world, Commander. He turned, and walked away. As he did, he looked up. She saw a raven winging its way to the south. Chapter 37, Epilogue. The wolf pup lay in Bruhan's lap. Bruhan sat on the floor, with his head in the lap of Leliana. She thought he might actually be asleep. Cathiel and Alistair were passing a bottle back and forth between them. They'd been doing it for the better part of half an hour, but barely a quarter of the bottle was gone. Loghain and Jarath had gone with a group of soldiers, to aid in clearing some spawn that had dug in rather than flee. Lenore and Braska were overseeing the retrieval of the archdemon's corpse, and the gathering of the blood. It's done, Alistair said again, as if he couldn't believe it. Cathiel leaned back in the chair. What happens now? We rebuild, Setida said. You and Alistair take the throne, and kick off Ferelden's golden age. Alistair blinked. Maker, that's right. I'm king now, aren't I? He laughed softly. I mean, I knew it, but I didn't actually. He shook his head. Know it, you know. And we have to plan a coronation ceremony, Leliana said brightly. And a wedding. Maker, Cathiel said. We are going to get married. You aren't having second thoughts, are you? Alistair asked. Of course not. It's just. She looked down. Maker. She sighed. I always thought when the day came, I'd have Mother and Oriana there, bothering me and taking care of all the details. Leliana gave her a reassuring smile. You'll have Lenore, Win, Setida, and I. We'll make sure you get pestered. Alistair's speech was beautiful. It should be. It had taken Leliana and Brujhan hours to write it. It cemented the alliances that had been forged in battle. Aid for Orzammar. Land for the Dalish. Respect for the elves. Freedom for the Circle. Honor for the Wardens. She wondered who had given him the idea to grant house lands to the Wardens, then saw Cathiel's satisfied smile. They stood as one, even Loghain included, as the crown offered its gratitude. Alistair managed to sneak in officially granting her the title of Hero of Ferelden. She wondered which of her companions was responsible for that one, and saw Lenore's satisfied smirk. What was it Brujhan liked to say? Emishem Nan. Gorham stood with a small group of nobles. Glorious, he said. You've really showed these humans something. Forged an army. Took down a blight. It's good to see you, Gorham. I'm not just here to witness the human spectacle, however. The assembly contacted me with a message for you. He shrugged, but smiled delightedly. I guess they figured once a manservant, always a manservant. I don't mind. The thing is, we've both been given leave to return to Orzammar. Both of us. Apparently. I went down with you, seems I rise back up with you too. Seems your brother is mighty grateful for what you did. We've been restored to House Ejikin, full rights, and everything. He gave her an awestruck look. There is a motion before the assembly to have you named a paragon. Getting the humans to help Orzammar like you did. He chuckled. That should make it a lock. Paragon. Not a bad change from an exiled murderer, no? Congratulations, my friend. He shrugged. Think you might head back home? To tell them of the humans coming, at the very least. I suppose I should. Good. And I would be proud to take up my old position, if you'll have me. He gestured at the crowd. At any rate, I'll let the humans get back to their dwarf worship. He laughed. Still makes me smile to hear them talk. She walked away, and found a quiet corner for a moment. Ejikin. Paragon. Big changes. She was expected to stay on as Warden Commander. And yet, perhaps there was a better solution. She went to find Cathiel. Andoran audition, Delenn. Ashel looked him over, her eyes warm. It is so wonderful to see you again, healthy and whole. Brujhan hugged her. Did the rest of the clan come with you? I fear they were too afraid to come into such a great city. It is so different from what we are used to. She chuckled nervously. I find myself constantly bewildered. He smiled. It was odd, now, how comfortable he was standing among the nobility of Denerim. They send their well wishes with me. The keeper was especially proud at the word of your victory. She said she cannot wait to tell the other clans. She gazed up at him, and almost choked on her words. And this thing you have done. She smiled. Land to settle one. A tear rolled down one cheek. I cannot express what this means to the clans. Imagine the look on the keeper's face when she learns of this. Will you come with me to tell her? Gladly. Though I must return. She hugged him. Wonderful. You will see the joy this will bring. It will be a day to remember for a very long time. She put a hand on his arm. Her eyes lit up. I could build a house. On land that is my own, forever. Is that not the strangest thought? I look forward to visiting it. I should not take up so much of your time. Go, Delenn. Celebrate your victory and be merry. The gods smile on you, truly. Syrian shook his head and smiled. My. I almost don't recognize my own son. First a Grey Warden and now a great hero? And you've even made me a nobleman, the voice of our people? I barely know what to think. I am awed, and so proud. He sighed. If only your mother had lived to see this day. I don't know if having a ban will change anything. Alistair had tried to convince him to take the job. He'd suggested his father instead. There were things to consider. Debts still to be paid. And this is your fault? If anything, for Ferelden to have elven heroes will only do us good. Perhaps in time, with a new human on the throne, things will change for us. I can only hope it will be so. But never mind your old man. There is much for the heroes of Ferelden to do today, yes? Go. He gave Jaroth a small shove towards the party. I shall speak to you soon. It is very strange to hear so many speak of a mage in such glowing terms, Irving said. Deserved, of course, but still not what I am accustomed to. He gave her a bewildered look. I must thank you, however, for freeing the circle from our shackles. That was most unexpected, indeed. You could have asked for anything. I did what I thought was right. He gave her a warm, grateful smile. Most would have asked for wealth, or power. Thank you. This is a gift we will not abuse. He sighed. Now, I should leave you to your celebration. Uldred's revolt has left me. He sighed. Very quick to tire these days. Retirement will come soon, I think. Give everyone my love. Lenore smiled. Even Grigor. I look forward to seeing what you accomplish next. So we made it. I'm impressed, aren't you? Alistair smiled at her. I was so scared that I might lose you, but... He touched her cheek. Here you are. And here I am. Not bad, right? Cathiel kissed him. I'm with you. How could anything be bad? Griffin barked happily, dancing in a circle around them. A Grey Warden. And now a hero, too? A bit different from the slums, Aren't you married to a king? Braska asked, putting an arm around her shoulders. Ha! I'm his concubine, but it's a comfortable position anyhow, I'll give you that. She laughed softly. Mother swore off drinking when she heard about what you did. She's been sober ever since. And as ill as a fellcat in water. She took a deep breath. I should tell you, the assembly actually sent me here. Officially, I'm an ambassador. She giggled. Can you imagine? Me. Apparently, miracles abound these days. She shook her head. They want me to tell you that you're free to return to Orzammar. They've made you a full citizen. Technically, you're warrior caste. He blinked. Can they do that? I don't know, but they did. She elbowed him lightly. Of course, that means Mother is risen up, too. She's been lording it over all her friends, calling them lowly peasants. I hear they're considering making you a paragon. Statue and everything. Not bad, brother. Not bad at all. All he could do was stare at her, his mouth hanging open. After a moment, she reached over and shut it, then laughed. Anyhow, I intend to get back to sampling this human wine, she said. I'd like to forget there's a giant sky up there. How they live up here, I'll never know. You'd be surprised how fast you get used to it. It's good to see you again, Cadden. Sten looked around. These people. He shrugged. They call you hero. It's a strange word, but I think I understand its meaning. The Orishik on occasion has declared a Qunari to be Qunaren Vel, one who serves as an example to others. Such examples are always made after their death, however. A death in service to the Qun. A living Qunaren Vel would be too proud. Do the Qunari celebrate and put on parades? Sedida asked. When a Qunaren Vel is declared, certainly. It is one of the few occasions when the Qunari are permitted to engage in. He shook his head. Revelry. There is imbibing of spirits, public chanting, meditations abandoned. He kept his face serious, but there was a slight twinkle in his eyes. It is madness. She forced her face into a serious expression. That would be quite a sight. It is. He nodded. Interesting. It can take days for the Ben Hassrat to restore order. There may even be executions. He looked down at her. I suppose I should tell you. He glanced at the door, then back at her. I have decided to return to my people. Your quest is done, and thus so is my reason for accompanying you. A heartbeat passed. And she made a decision. I could go with you, if you like. He blinked. Is that truly what you want? There is much to hold you here, and it is a long journey. There was much to hold her here. Perhaps too much. She wasn't ready to go back to Orzammar, and play the game and pretend. Somebody has to make sure you stay on the path. You would. He actually looked startled, then he smiled. Oh. You are joking. That is. He nodded. Funny. He tilted his head at her. If you truly wish to come, I have a ship prepared to leave in 2 days' time. 2 days was long enough. I'll be there. He looked pleased. Meet me at the docks after all this celebration is over. It would be good to continue our travels. So it appears that Riordan was wrong. I find it difficult to believe that he deliberately misled us. Have you another explanation for what happened? Loghain glanced down at the man he was still surprised to consider a friend. Jarath shrugged. Does it matter? Ferelden has driven back a blight, accomplishing in a year what took Orlais, the Anderfells, the Free Marches, and the Tevinter Imperium over a decade. I should be content, yes? Still, the Orlesian Grey Wardens have been persistent with their questions. I intend to keep any thoughts on the matter to myself. I understand you are returning to the Wardens. As am I. I have been tapped to lead up their recruitment efforts here in Ferelden. Anara's influence, no doubt. I would have preferred she not interfered. A small concession in return for her service to the crown. She loves you, obviously. And it seems a fitting task. True enough. Allow me to say before I go that you have earned my respect. Odd that I ended up here, saying that, but there it is. Return to your celebration. I shall see you with the Wardens. Burhan moved her through the steps of the dance with an ease that belied the fact she'd only taught him the steps the night before. She smiled at him. So here we are. The conquering hero has won the day, and now he takes his bow and exits the stage. A fine ending. It doesn't have to be an ending. I'm glad to hear that. She took his hand as they moved through the line of dancers. You know, I can't help but think of my vision. Whether it was the Maker sending me to you, or whatever. She kissed him. It was a good thing. She met his eyes. I thought I was supposed to save you, to show you the way. She smiled. But it seems it was meant to be the other way around. Odd how that works, no. I think you did plenty. Flatterer. She gave him a coy look. So, if I heard right, you'll be leaving soon. Any room for an extra body on your travels? Only if it's you. He twirled her through the next part of the dance. Good. I imagine that whatever you get up to, it'll be anything but boring. The dance came to an end. At any rate, I should let you get back to your celebration before someone drags you away. She kissed him. I look forward to seeing you again afterwards. May I speak with your majesties for a moment? Of course, Alistair said. Just one majesty, Cathiel said. Until the wedding. I'm going to pass the title of Warden Commander to Jarath. Cathiel and Alistair exchanged a look. Slowly, they both nodded. Why? Alistair asked. I have matters to settle in Orzammar. I'm thinking of going to Par Vollen to speak with the Orishik regarding the Blight and Wardens. I could use a vacation. She sighed. And if we don't come up with a reason for him to stay, I'm worried he's going to take off to look for Morrigan. We've been worried over that last one, Cathiel admitted. Alistair nodded. I was considering insisting he take up the position of Elvin Ban. Sedada nodded. So neither of you object. They exchanged a look. Cathiel slowly nodded. I realized. I think it was just after the tower, that if something happened to you, we'd be following Jarath. It occurred to me I should have been annoyed that you sent him to take Soldier's Peak, but I wasn't. He was the right man for the job, I think. She glanced in Jarotha's direction. If it's not you, it has to be him. And keeping him with the wardens is a good thing. Sedida nodded. Then she exhaled. They are thinking of making me a paragon. Maker. So. Alistair considered a moment. If you are a paragon, and I am a king. He raised an eyebrow. Which of us outranks the other? You are still staying on as court mage, I hope. Cathiel asked. There has not been a mage advising the throne in a long time, Wynne said. Cathiel hugged her. I'm glad you think this is worthy of your time. I will not lie motionless in bed, with coverlets up to my chin, waiting for death to claim me. She smiled fondly. So you had better listen to me, because I swear, if I should fall before the end and you don't seem to be doing things properly, I'll get up again to give you a good finger wagging. I'll hold you to that promise. You know, I think the two of you are going to do just fine. Humans have a better taste for spirits than I thought. Heh. The ale up here is actually good. He took a drink of that ale. Orzammar ale tastes like dirt in comparison. Probably because they put dirt in it. Go figure. Sedida shook her head fondly. Think you might go back to Orzammar. I'm getting used to that big sky up there. And I'm thinking I might just look up Felsey again, see where that goes. You're done adventuring. Maybe for a bit. Talk to me in a year or so when I'm bored, maybe I'll think differently. I might be back by then. Ah well, enough babbling. That pot-bellied son of a Hortigan said I'd pass out before drinking an entire barrel of pickle juice. I am to prove him wrong. She laughed. Don't ever change. Who, me? He snorted. It's been good traveling with you, Warden. Don't get lost in the shuffle, now. You are staying with the wardens then? Sedida asked him. Yes. Jaroth glanced at her. Then I suppose this is yours. She handed him the commander's helm they'd retrieved from the vault. He blinked. You aren't staying. Oh, I'm staying a warden. Just not staying in Ferelden. I'm heading to Par Vollen with Sten. We can answer the question for the Orishik, and then perhaps do some recruiting among the Qunari. That could be. He twitched a shoulder. Interesting. So you'll take the post. He considered for a moment. Then he shrugged. There was only one answer. The duty could not be forsworn. Of course. Good. She gave him a worried look. Jaroth. She sighed. Where is Morrigan? That's a very good question. I take it she's behind the you not being dead thing. That would be a rational conclusion. Someday, Jaroth, I'm going to ask you a question, and you are going to give me a straight answer. I believe I did just a few moments ago, when you asked me if I would take up the post of Warden Commander. The official title is Commander of the Grey. I suppose it's better than Swordy Person with Griffin Fetish. Sedida grimaced. Please don't give Cathiel any ideas. I will be relieved when all this pomp and ceremony is done. Zevran winked. Such events are perfect opportunities for assassins, after all. I can't help but expect the crows to appear at any moment. Which would be a welcome break, mind you. You think the crows will still come after you? Lenore asked. He shrugged. Eventually. With Taliesin dead, it may take them time to figure out what has happened. He waved. But they are like the tides. Predictable. So how about we go looking for them instead? Braska asked. Zevran blinked. You did say earlier you were planning on leaving soon. Is that true? Why? Lenore asked, batting her eyes at him. You want to come along? He smiled. It occurs to me that I live better than I'm near you. And that's aside from any other. He chuckled. Ancillary benefits. And those are good benefits, Braska said, encircling Lenore's waist with one arm. He held his other hand out to Zevran. Zevran took the hand, then extended his other hand to Lenore. Then let us not spend any time apart. It shall be an adventure to remember. He considered a moment. Well. He laughed. Another one. Cathiel glanced over at her soon-to-be husband, who was practically dancing with excitement. What is it? Alistair grinned at her. I have a surprise for you. Oh, is it bigger than a bread box? She batted her eyes. Considerably. He opened a door, and revealed. Her heart skipped a beat. Fergus. He swept her up into a hug. When I heard my little sister was not only a Grey Warden, but also leading Ferelden into battle, I was surprised, to put it mildly. Father. He sighed. He would have been so proud of you. I know I am. You've done good. She clung to him. How paid for what he did? I killed him myself. How has lost everything? That bastard. Vengeance is bitter, but I think about Oren. He shook his head. It barely seems like it's enough. At least Amaranthin now belongs to the Grey Wardens. There's some justice in that, I think. I need to go back to Highever. See if I can clean up the mess How made of it. I will see you soon, I hope. Sir Gilmore also survived. He can help you. I'll see you at the wedding, for certain. My little sister. Fergus chuckled. Marrying the king. All I can think is what Mother would have said about that. Take care of yourself, you hear? Or I'll find you and nag you like Mother did until you are ready to tear out your hair. Braska found Jaroth standing on the castle battlements. He was twisting a ring around on his finger. Braska walked over and leaned on the rampart next to him. So, you're the bloke in charge now. Everyone else ducked. He laughed. Fireball and I are going to take care of a couple of Zev's lingering problems. We'll be back though, eventually. He shook his head. Remember looking out over the wilds, waiting for sunset? I do. Ever think we'd all make it? I was fairly sure one of us would kill Bruhan. I was betting on it Bane you, actually, then he went and turned into a decent bloke. He looked back over his shoulder. Party's over. Fireball and Zev passed out. Can't hold their bloody liquor. He hesitated. You okay, Junior? I think I am. So, now what? Jaroth shrugged. Remember that one nobleman who didn't back us at the land's meet? Yeah. He's got some gems called the Tears of Androsta. Want to go steal them? Braska laughed. After you, Commander. Check the description for the links to the author.